The captain wiped his tears, mounted his horse, and rode away with all his might. "General! Why don't we raise the 9 Supreme Lords' revenge flag?" Captain Zheng was on the verge of breaking down.
He ran out of the tent and cried, "Our brothers from the other directions have already risen."
"Are we really that guilty?" The general was taken aback. "What flag of vengeance?" "It's a flag of revenge to seek justice for the 9 Supreme Lords. Why don't we raise it?" Captain Zheng bawled, wiping his tears and snot all over his face. "Your father has been a soldier for so many years. I'm used to seeing life and death on the battlefield. Your father has never cried in water or fire. But today, your father has had enough. Your father has been humiliated to this extent, yet I dare not make a sound. I wish I could die right now. When I heard that the 9 Supreme Lords were killed, your father cut my own face and swore a blood oath to avenge them. Now, the spearhead of the 9 Supreme Lords' murder is actually directed at us. Could it be that the rumors are true? Are we, the Northern Troop, really a bunch of ungrateful people? Murdering our saviors. How can our brothers still have the face to live?" Captain Zheng was sobbing, his tears and snot running down his face. "Flag of vengeance?" The general's eyes were bloodshot as well. "Send a few men to check on the situation." "I'm not going. I'm not going. I'm not going either." One of the deputy generals was appointed. His face turned red as he roared, "Why should I go?" "Why don't you go? What face do you have to go out now? Even if your father stuffed my face into my pants, it's all gone. How can I have the face to go out and face the other brothers?" The general's eyes were spitting fire. "None of you want to go out? Then F***ck off your father. Your father will go out and have a look myself." The general urged his horse forward. It was only the time it took to drink a cup of tea before he came back again and again. His face was flushed, his eyes bloodshot as he roared, "Make flags for your father. Raise the flags. Set up the altar. Faster. We, the Northern Troop brothers, are not ungrateful people. We have no cowards. If Yang Butao really murdered the 9 Supreme Lords, the Northern Troop brothers will be the first to find him." The general bellowed. Once the command was given, the entire military base was in an uproar. The soldiers went back to make flags, their faces finally showing some signs of life. "Gather the men. Gather." The general bellowed again. Suddenly, a troop of men came over with a cold expression. "What? Jiang Chenglong, are you trying to rebel by gathering your men privately?" It was Yang Butao's most elite janissaries who had come over. The one who spoke was his janissary general. Jiang Chenglong looked over with bloodshot eyes and waved his hand. "Gather. Ignore them." The janissary general strode forward. "Jiang Chenglong, how dare you make the decision without the marshal's order? It's your business if you're not afraid of death, but it's not good if you implicate your brothers. How many lives do you have to pay for it?" The janissary was a quick-witted man. He knew that it was futile to suppress the situation and would only bring about the opposite effect. However, it might be effective if he shifted the threat to his subordinates. Jiang Chenglong's eyes glared as if they were about to burst into tears of blood as he said fiercely, "If Yang Butao is really related to the 9 Supreme's murder, then he's not fit to be our Northern Troops marshal. Your father will fight him with my life. So what if your father gave this assembly order on my own? At most, your father will pay with my life later, and your father will definitely give this order. F***CKU. The marshal is innocent. Didn't we explain everything clearly yesterday?" The janissary general roared. "If the marshal is innocent, when the truth comes to light, I, Jiang Chenglong, will tie my own hands and ask for my own death. Gathering military forces on my own merits, death awaits. The military law is merciless. But now, the Northern Troop must act according to my order." Jiang Chenglong roared, "As the deputy marshal, I have the authority to mobilize the troops. You're only the head of Yang Butao's janissary troops. What right do you have to ask your father what to do? Get out of the way, or else, I'll punish you according to military law right now." The janissary general's gaze turned to stare at Jiang Chenglong, his hands slowly pressing on the hilt of his saber. Jiang Chenglong did not move, his gaze equally fierce. In spite of this, everyone around Jiang Chenglong roared at the same time, unsheathing their sabers and swords as they looked at Yang Butao's Qin soldiers like hungry wolves. Only a glance or a movement was needed, and it would be a huge battle. Get back! Jiang Chenglong hollered. Do you really want to do this? The Janissary captain sucked in a deep breath and pointed a finger at Jiang Chenglong. Just you wait. He turned to lead his men back. Now do as I say. Immediately. Immediately. Jiang Chenglong's expression was steely. The Janissary captain returned to his own tent with a heavy expression, only to find that an altar had been erected outside his tent. The portraits of the 9 Supremes had been placed there. The captain's gaze wavered. The Janissary soldiers around him evaded his gaze. Some were panting, everyone seemed to have a bellyful of things to say. Captain, is it true? Finally, a man asked in a trembling voice. I believe in the Marshal. He would never do such a thing. It's all the lies of spies. They're distorting the truth. The captain said through gritted teeth. What if it's really the Marshal's doing? Another man asked. The captain's facial muscles twitched. He did not speak for a moment. He stood straight, looking at the portraits of the 9 Supremes. Suddenly, he knelt down. All the Janissary soldiers' faces darkened. As the Marshal's Janissary soldiers, we're always at the forefront in every battle. Every time we lose, it's also when we're the most desperate and in the most dangerous situation. Therefore, every time the 9 Supremes Lords make a move, it's equivalent to saving everyone. But we're the Marshal's Janissary soldiers. If this is true, the entire Northern troop can say that it's the Marshal's doing alone. It has nothing to do with the Northern troop. Only we can't say that. No one will believe us even if we say it. We're the Marshal's Janissary soldiers. We're the Marshal's most trusted and closest people. We are indebted to the 9 Supremes Lords for saving our lives countless times, but we are also indebted to the Marshal. The captain closed his eyes and said quietly, if it's true, his voice suddenly choked. If it's true, no matter which side we're on now, how can we live after this? As his words trailed off, the surroundings fell into silence. In the palace, Grand Commandant Feng Qingtian reclined on his chair, panting laboriously. His Majesty sat on the big chair in the royal study, quietly waiting for the results. Qiu Zhenhan and Lang Daoyin stared at the old Grand Commandant with widened eyes. After a long time, Feng Qingtian opened his eyes and said, what Yang Buotao said was a lie. Moreover, he seemed to have prepared it a long time ago. So, there must be something wrong with Yang Buotao in this matter. His Majesty nodded calmly and said, with the old Grand Commandant's testimony, the truth is clear. However, Yang Buotao's betrayal has become a trivial matter. The real crux should be, the tornado that appeared last night, was it Supreme Wind himself? And the one who attacked with fire, was it Supreme Flame? Chapter 247. Qiu Zhenhan said, from what I see, this is most likely true. There's indeed something wrong with the flame, but Supreme Wind can basically confirm it. It's just that it's hard to say if he's willing to show himself. Old Grand Commandant Feng Qingtian coughed and said, Your Majesty, please don't let your guard down. Although my ingenious providence can tell that Yang Buotao is suspicious, it's not as obvious as it used to be. It's not hard to deduce that Yang Buotao might have other tricks up his sleeves. His true ability is most probably not as simple as what we've seen. Besides, he's still one of Yutong's 4 marshals, His Majesty frowned and said. That's right. I was too naive just now. Putting aside the possibility that Yang Buotao might have hidden his true strength, this matter has been pushed to the forefront now. It's impossible to take down Yang Buotao, an important military general, one of Yutong's 4 marshals, with mere groundless evidence. It's not something that I can do alone. However, if Supreme Wind really reappears, as long as Supreme Wind is determined to capture Yang Buotao, he'll definitely appear to verify this matter. As long as Supreme Wind appears and proves his identity, Yang Buotao won't need to be interrogated at all. He'll be convicted directly and the soldiers under his command won't defend him. However, if Supreme Wind doesn't appear, this matter, His Majesty pondered. Old Marshal Qiu Zhenhan said, It's inevitable that Supreme Wind will appear. However, what we need to worry about now is actually the same as Supreme Wind's concern. Once Supreme Wind appears, what can we do to ensure his safety? Difficult. Old Grand Commandant Feng Qingtian coughed and covered his mouth with his hand. Lang Daoyin passed him a handkerchief swiftly. Fong Qingtian spat out a mouthful of phlegm, his breath finally smoothing out. He said, difficult. As long as Supreme Wind doesn't appear, he can do whatever he wants in this world. However, if his whereabouts are exposed, he'll definitely become the target of all his enemies. Back then, the 9 Supremes were still about to perish under the heavy ambush. Now that there's only Supreme Wind by himself, even with Supreme Flame's help, the situation is still not optimistic. After all, the enemies they have to face include enemy countries and the martial world. There are even many spies in this dynasty, Old Grand Commandant panted and said. It's impossible to guard against. If Supreme Wind appears, he can kill Yang Buotao, but the price is too high. The loss outweighs the gain, Old Grand Commandant coughed violently and said. This old official knows your Majesty's intention. He wants to meet Supreme Wind and ease his mind. However, using such a method to force Supreme Wind out, the disadvantages outweigh the advantages. It's not worth it. In my opinion, why don't we just cut the chase and kill Yang Buotao's family? The Old Grand Commandant coughed a few times and said, in this way, Supreme Wind doesn't have to show himself. His Majesty's arbitrary actions are undesirable, but it's not that he can't or shouldn't do so. If we can be sure, Yang Buotao's death will be fine. But if we can't be sure, be it me or the military, we can't get rid of the stigma of killing a good man. The price will be equally huge. Grand Commandant, using the exquisite jade heart to prove that Yang Buotao is unusual. We can believe it, but it can't be used as proof. If we really do so, the outside world will only say that an unknown assassin in black turned into a gust of wind and made us kill a country's marshal with a single sentence. His Majesty smiled bitterly. There are many follow-up issues. If we don't handle it well, it might lead to another's one long incident. Furthermore, the military of the other countries will probably make a big deal out of this, breaking down Yutong's military morale bit by bit. Old Grand Commandant frowned, speechless. His Majesty's considerations were reasonable. Acting rashly without any proof would not be able to hide the world's gossip. The Empire of Yutong was the world's public enemy. Once there was an opportunity to attack, the other countries would not let it go easily. Supreme Wind's reappearance this time is targeted at Yang Buotao. I believe he has the intention to bring Yang Buotao to justice. As long as he doesn't reveal his real face and identity, there won't be too much trouble. Lang Daoyin said, the only thing that needs to be resolved is probably the aftermath of Supreme Wind's reappearance. Breaking away from the tracking of those with ulterior motives is the key now. I can basically confirm that if there's something fishy going on with Yang Buotao, the reason why the people behind him did not provide more support to help him get out of his predicament is probably because they're waiting for Supreme Wind to show up and use this opportunity to understand Supreme Wind's real identity. Lang Daoyin said, since they're waiting, they must have the means to track him down. They might even have the confidence to stop Supreme Wind from turning into a gust of wind. Just like what Old Lang said, this is the most troublesome problem. The mysterious arcane skills that these people of Shanhai possess are really not something that we can speculate about now. Qiu Zhenhan sighed deeply. How's the current reaction in the military camp? His Majesty asked. The military camp is boiling. It's almost out of control. Lang Daoyin chuckled humorlessly. Actually, it's not just the military camp. The entire Tiantang city is boiling. His Majesty pondered and said, this matter needs to be settled as soon as possible. Let's hold a public trial for Yang Buotao in Tiantang Square, in front of the Monument of Brave Souls. The rest of the people's eyes shone brightly. Brilliant plan. Qiu Zhenhan. What show? Is it worth looking forward to? Someone is going to die soon, and it's going to be a horrible death. I heard it's a martial. How can I not watch such a show? There was no way to chat anymore. It was better to go to another stall. How much are you selling these vegetables? Not for sale. Why? Because I'm happy. Happy? What a strong reason. The manager had no choice but to go to another stall. How much are you selling these vegetables? Not for sale. Why? I'm not happy. Not happy? It was the same strong reason. It was fine if he was happy and not selling, but why would he not sell even if he was unhappy? The steward wanted to question him, but he forced himself to hold back. If he asked, he might be beaten up. Normally he wouldn't be afraid, but this time, forget it, he would go to another place.
Your vegetables. I'm not selling them.
If I sell them to you, what will I feed the pigs with when I go home? Your vegetables. This is for people to eat.
It's not suitable for you to eat. Similar answers were given, each more ferocious than the last, and each more directed than the last. The steward patiently asked around and finally found someone who couldn't resist the temptation of the shining silver and wanted to make a deal. However, just as he was about to reach out to take the silver, he discovered that everyone in the market was staring at his hand with their eyes wide open. Countless eyes were focused on him. Some were looking at him with contempt, some were disdainful, some were angry that he did not want to compete, and there were even more who were furious. The man's hand suddenly retracted as if it was scalded by fire. From the eyes of those people, he could see that as long as he sold a vegetable to the Young family today, he would not be able to establish a foothold in this place for the rest of his life. He could not help but laugh dryly and retract his hand, saying, "I forgot my vegetables today, they are not delicious." The manager saw that he had succeeded, but why did this guy change his mind? He immediately became anxious. How is it not delicious?
Isn't it the same as before?
I'm mainly afraid that you will mind. The man laughed dryly. Today, I peed in the vegetables.
Cough. My son also defecated on it. If you don't mind. Chapter 248. The steward almost vomited. Wash it twice more? Fine. F***CKU.
If it had been in the past, he would have slapped the person who dared to speak to him like this, but now, he really did not dare. Even if he were to vomit to death, he dared not do it in front of him. In short, the steward had been to 3 markets but he did not manage to buy a single stalk of vegetables. He returned empty-handed, but it was not as easy as when he had come.
There was a sentry every few steps he took.
Before he had even taken a few steps, the steward had already been searched everywhere on his body, not letting go of any hidden spots.
After this round of searching, he would be met with another wave of searches every few steps he took. Again, all the hidden spots on his body were searched. They wanted to see if there was any news. What if the search was not thorough and they missed it? Those hidden spots were the main targets of the search. They could not be let go. By the time the steward returned to the residence of Young, it was already the 4th hour of the night. The search along the way had almost cost him half his life.
Even the gaps of his nails had been searched. Where else could he not find? There was also that and that, a broken anus, a body full of wounds. It was not fake at all. In the inner yard of the residence of Yang Buetao looked as calm as ever on the surface, but in reality, his heart was in a state of turmoil, and he couldn't calm down in the slightest. Surrounding him were the Four Seasons Tower's experts who had used various identities to sneak in. There were more than 20 of them. However, even though there were many people, it was peaceful and calm. To these people, the matter before them was only a trivial matter. Whether they succeeded or failed, it was insignificant. However, the significance of the current matter to Yang Buetao was very different. Yang Buetao, as a Yutong's man, had been born and raised in Yutong, built a family, built a career, and built a meritorious service. It had not been easy for him to come this far. It had only been a few days, but Yang Buetao had suddenly realized that what he had painstakingly built and fought for his entire life was about to be destroyed. The source of all this was because he had thought that he had done it carefully, a secret that no one would ever know about. His current feelings were indescribable and indescribable. Looking at the indifferent faces of the Four Seasons Tower's experts around him, Yang Buetao was exasperated. Of course, you don't have to care. You can just leave this place and return to the martial world. The 4 corners of the world are your home. Anyway, you've gotten used to such a life. But me? Does anyone spare a thought for me? Marshal, madam invites you. A pretty little maid walked over timidly. Yang Buetao coughed and said, "Did madam say what happened? I still have important matters to attend to. If there's nothing important, we'll talk later." For some reason at this moment, Yang Buetao suddenly felt flustered and afraid to face the person who he had slept with for several decades. He was clearly bored to death, but he didn't dare to say it out loud, and he didn't dare to face her. Madam seems to have something important to discuss with Marshal. Marshal, please come over as soon as possible, the little maid said. Tell madam that I'll be there soon. Yang Buetao paced back and forth, muttering to himself for a long while. Finally he sighed and said, "Everyone, please wait here for a moment. I'll be right back." A green-robed old man who was the leader said with a smile, "Marshal, please do as you please."
Yang Buotao nodded and strode away. Madam is looking for me? Yang Buotao followed her into the bedroom. This was the most private space in the entire Yang mansion. Usually, the only people who could enter this room were the husband, wife, and a personal maid who was in charge of cleaning and tidying the room. But now, in this private space, there was a small table in front of the bed. There were 4 dishes, a pot of wine, 2 wine cups, and 2 sets of chopsticks on it. I don't know why, but I'm suddenly in the mood to have a drink with my husband tonight. Yang Buotao's wife was the daughter of an official. Although she was already in her 40s, she still had a slim figure and was as beautiful as a flower. For Yang Buotao to have such a wife made others envious. It could be said to be a trivial matter and a topic of conversation. I didn't expect Madam to have such a refined interest. I'll have a drink with Madam. Yang Buotao laughed heartily and seemed to be in high spirits. He sat down and smelled the aroma of the dishes. His face was intoxicated. Madam's dishes are getting better and better. Eat more if you think it's good. Madame Yang sat opposite and raised her wine cup. She looked at Yang Buotao lovingly. My husband, please. Madam, please. Yang Buotao laughed heartily and drank the wine in his cup. He looked very cheerful and carefree, much more relaxed than his usual dignified appearance. However, he had completely concealed all of his negative emotions. Madame Yang covered her face with her sleeves and drank the wine in her cup slowly. As she drank, her eyes stared at Yang Buotao's face without blinking. Why are you looking at me like that? Yang Buotao smiled. Do you think I'm old? Madame Yang smiled gently. My husband is in his prime. How can you say that? But I looked at the moon last night and suddenly remembered that it has been 27 years since I married into the Yang family. Yang Buotao sighed unnoticeably. 27 years. So it has been that long. Since ancient times, beauties were like famous generals. They were not allowed to see their hair turn white. Be it beauties or famous generals, the merciless years were their biggest enemies that they could not fight against. This time, Madame Yang looked out of the window and said slowly, It doesn't seem to be easy? Yang Buotao shuddered and said, Don't worry, madam. This incident is just a misunderstanding. Once everything is cleared up, everything will be settled and everything will return to normal. You don't have to worry about it. Madame Yang turned around slowly and looked at Yang Buotao's face gently, trying to catch his gaze. However, Yang Buotao's gaze only met hers once before he looked away and raised his wine cup for the second time. I know it's true. Madame Yang said, You and I have slept together for so many years. I know your habits. You will look away the moment you feel guilty. Especially when you're facing me. Yang Buotao remained silent and did not reply for a long time. Since the year before last, your temper has been weird and getting worse. You would always go out for a walk alone in the middle of the night, Madame Yang said. I knew then that something was wrong with you. Last year, when the 9 Supremes Lords were ambushed, you became more and more abnormal. Initially, I thought you were worried because of the 9 Supremes Lords' unfortunate demise and Yutong's fortune. However, when you personally killed the old dog that you had reared for more than a decade, I vaguely felt that things weren't as simple as they seemed. Later on, you would often wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat. It only showed your abnormality. Madame Yang said quietly, I know something is wrong with you, but I won't ask if you don't want to talk about it. You're a man. You should have some space for yourself. I believe you won't hide anything from me if you can tell me. Previously, I was still naively fantasizing that you would definitely be able to tide through it on your own and adjust yourself very quickly. Mistress Yang smiled sadly. That's why I've been waiting all this while, waiting for you to tide through it and then tell me about this journey of yours. I didn't expect that I would wait for this day and that what I've waited for is such a terrifying news. Is my sky going to fall? Madame Yang shook her head and sighed. Husband, why is this so? Tell me, I want to know. Yang Buotao sat like a statue, motionless and silent for a long time. Since Madame Yang began to speak, he had not moved. However, his face grew paler and paler. When he heard the question, Yang Buotao shuddered involuntarily. Husband is a native of Yutong. The blood of Yutong flows in your veins. Since enlisting in the military, you've been on the battlefield for a long time, you've been through hundreds of battles. All the way until now,
You're already second only to one and above tens of thousands of people. You can be said to be at the pinnacle of being a vassal. On the battlefield, you're the marshal of an army.
Chapter 249.
Madame Yang replied calmly, half a year ago, I had already arranged for my youngest son, Yang Qin, to go to his maternal grandfather's house. You've even asked why he hasn't returned yet. 1,000 miles is not considered far.
I can answer my husband's question now. Qin won't be coming back. He didn't go to his maternal grandfather's house. Instead, he entered a sect and became a disciple of a sect. This is my arrangement. At that time, I was afraid that you wouldn't agree, so I didn't tell you the truth. I only hoped that one day, when Qin's cultivation was successful, he would come back and tell you everything. Now, it seems, everything was a lucky hit, and your Yang family has left behind a little bloodline. As the daughter-in-law of the Yang family, this is also something that I have done for your family.
Phew! Yang Buotao let out a long sigh, as if he had put down a huge stone in his heart. He said gratefully, Thank you, my good wife.
Mistress Yang looked at Yang Buotao and said, Even now, you still don't want to tell me the reason?
Yang Buotao took a deep breath, as if he wanted to say something, but he swallowed the words that were about to come out of his mouth.
He said, Madam doesn't need to know about this. Just take it that
Yang Buotao's heart was suddenly blinded by lard and possessed by a ghost. His eyes were filled with anguish as he said, I, Yang Buotao, have let down the 9 Supremes first in my life. Letting down you, my wife, is the second. He stood up and stared at his wife. Suddenly, he knelt down and said, My wife, I'm sorry. The tears that Mrs. Yang was trying her best to hold back finally flowed out. Even at this point, he still refused to speak. Yang Buotao slowly stood up and walked out without looking back. Yang Buotao knew that there was no turning back for him. There was no turning back for him since a long time ago.
Mistress Yang's tears streamed down her cheeks.
After a long time she said, Forget it. If you don't want to say it, then don't say it.
If I say it, I'll die too.
If I don't, I'll still die. There's nothing wrong with being a muddle-headed ghost. There's no need for humans to understand everything.
She picked up a cup of wine and slowly drank it.
She murmured, I wanted to poison this wine and end it all, but, in the end I couldn't bring myself to do it. Forget it. On the day of the public trial, let's go to the underworld together. The night was dark, and the wind was howling in the horizon. The wind seemed to be getting stronger and stronger. The cold wind whistled through the air, stirring up a sharp sound. It was as if thousands of ghosts were coming out at the same time, causing one's scalp to explode involuntarily. Countless people in Tiantang City were waiting for daybreak. When the sun rises, the truth will be revealed. Tai Zhang was an exception. He had gone to bed early, snoring loudly as he slept soundly like a dead pig. However, when the 4th night watch had passed, he woke up abruptly, scaring his wife who was beside him. Why so early? Something big happened today. Recover your energy and wake up early to prepare. Tai Zheng's upper body was bare as he sprung up. The cold wind blew on his bare chest and on his face. He shuddered, the remaining drowsiness vanishing without a trace. Tai Zhang used the cold well water to wash his face and put on his robe swiftly. After wiping his face carelessly, he said, Mistress, I am going to work. Without waiting for his wife's reply, he strode out. His wife, who was draped in a robe, leaned against the door. She vaguely felt that Tai Zhang was not quite himself today. It was only a court session as usual. Was there a need to be so valiant, as if he was about to fight a decisive battle? Yes, court session. However, Tai Zhang had a sword at his waist, a breastplate hanging on his chest. He was clad in armor, and his bodyguard behind him was helping him carry the glaive. How was this a court session? It was obviously a fight to the death. Just as she thought about it, she could not help covering her mouth in shock. Just as she was about to chase after him to ask, she realized that Tai Zhang had already disappeared around the corner. He was gone. At this moment, Tiantang Square was already crowded with people. A towering flag stood in the center. This flag was at least 200 feet tall, and the blood-red flag was fluttering in the air. Below the flag, there was a high platform. This platform was the main venue for the public trial. However, the public trial this time. All the higher-ups knew that this so-called public trial was only a pretense. Whether it was Yutong's higher-ups or the Four Seasons Tower side, they were all waiting for one person to show up. Whether the crime was proven or not, it did not depend on the evidence, but whether the person showed up or not. If Supreme Wind showed up, then Yang Buotao would be guilty and unpardonable. If Supreme Wind did not show up, then Yang Buotao would be innocent. All his crimes would be cleared and he would be safe and sound. Other witnesses and material evidence would not count. The sun was high up in the sky, its rays shining on the earth. The 5 main judges had all arrived. Yang Buotao, who was directly involved in the case, had also arrived to await his trial. Yang Buotao did not bring many people with him. There were less than 30 of them. They were all dressed in military uniforms, but the aura they exuded was enough to make Qiu Jianhan and the other bigwigs take a few more glances. This group of people had a domineering aura that was completely different from that of the military. It was clear to everyone that this group of people was not simple. They were not to be underestimated. Old Marshal Qiu snorted and said, "Marshal Yang, there are quite a number of experts among your bodyguards. Even this old man doesn't know if I should be envious or jealous when I see them." Yang Buotao's face was pale, looking rather absent-minded. He only hummed in response to old Marshal Qiu's harsh words, as if he did not hear what he said clearly. He did not offer any explanation or rebuttal. His back that had been as straight as a pine tree was obviously hunched. Tai Zhang had been paying attention to Yang Buotao's every movement and word since the moment he had arrived. His heart skipped a beat. It had only been one night, but Yang Buotao seemed to have aged 20 years in an instant. Had there been some other unforeseen event? When Tai Zhang heard old Qiu's sarcastic words that sounded like praise but were actually derogatory, he paid even more attention to Yang Buotao's actions. He had thought that the latter would defend himself endlessly, such as how he had been a marshal all his life, loyal and courageous, receiving the help of many righteous men. There was nothing strange about it. If Yang Buotao had said so, Tai Zhang would definitely have rushed over. Even if he did not fight, he would have spat on his face. However, Yang Buotao's actions were too unusual. Tai Zhang did not know what to do, so he sat down quietly. It was not only old Marshal Qiu and Tai Zhang who were paying attention to Yang Buotao, but everyone else who was present had their gazes focused on him. Facing the sword-like gazes from all directions, Yang Buotao lowered his eyelids. He did not speak nor move, his expression dull like a wooden sculpture. Among the group of people who had followed him here, there were 2 people who had always stood behind him, while the others had quietly dispersing into the crowd without leaving a trace. They seemed to be moving casually, but in reality, they had faintly formed an encirclement. It was a large circle. Yang Buotao sat there with his eyes closed, his expression as dark as still water. He was shocked by a sentence that he had been thinking about for a long time. Why? It was his wife, a question that was filled with doubt and incomprehension. Why? Yang Buotao was also asking the same question in his heart. However, there was only a bitter smile on his face. He had nothing to say to it. He had no heart to answer. He had come out today only to wait for this result. If Supreme Wind were to appear, it would be the final verdict. No matter how he refuted it, no matter how perfect the evidence was, it would be futile. If Supreme Wind did not appear. If he did not appear, Yang Buotao could not think of any reason why Supreme Wind would not appear. The 9 Supremes had never needed so many taboos in their actions. There was only what they should and should not do. In the past, Yutong's wars had been fraught with danger. There were countless battles where the situation was precarious. However, no matter how dangerous the war was, as long as they could make it in time, the 9 Supremes would definitely come to their aid. Everyone's attention was on them, waiting quietly to see how Supreme Wind would choose to deal with this difficult situation. Would he step forward to expose the traitor's mask and face the unpredictable crisis head-on? Or would he preserve his useful body and wait for another day to come? Time passed slowly, but Supreme Wind did not appear. Gradually, whispers could be heard from below the stage. Tai Zhang was dressed in martial attire, his left hand on the hilt of his sword while his right hand held onto his glaive, staring at the high platform like a tiger watching its prey. However, there was no movement from the other side. Tai Zhang's heart was beating like a drum. He believed in what Supreme Wind had said, that Yang Buotao must be the traitor, the one who had betrayed the 9 Supremes. However, it was not enough for him to believe in this matter. The public hearing must have sufficient credibility. Only Supreme Wind's appearance could settle the matter.
Everything else was as fleeting as the clouds. On the high platform, old Marshal Qiu Jianhan gazed afar, his expression carefree. Are you coming or not? After a while, whoosh whoosh, someone cried out in surprise, the wind is here. The wind is stronger. Chapter 250. Indeed, the howling northern wind had suddenly grown several times stronger. The flags of the three armies fluttered at the same time, adding to the grandeur of the scene. Countless people's expressions changed because of this. Some revealed expressions of joy, some revealed expressions of worry, and there were also expressions of emotions. In the depths of the crowd, there was a small group of people whose expressions did not change, but their gazes shone brightly, and a sharp glint could be faintly seen. Indeed, Qiu Jianhan stood against the wind, his gaze filled with nostalgia. The sound of the wind grew stronger and stronger. His Majesty, who had been waiting with his head lowered, lifted his head abruptly and stood up agitatedly. Yang Buitao's eyes slowly closed. He had come. He had come after all. I'm done for when he comes. This was something that he had been mentally prepared for, but when it really came, the last bit of luck he had was shattered. All the experts of the Four Seasons Tower were not bothered with Yang Buitao's emotions. All of them were fully focused, secretly linking their deific consciousness together, covering almost the entire Tiantang Square. Get ready! The wind rose, sweeping away the clouds. The clouds in the sky rippled, moving from the top of their heads to the other end of the sky. The sky was clear, cloudless for thousands of miles. It was filled with the radiant light of dawn, illuminating the universe. The crowd cheered in Tiantang Square. It was the voice of the people. Lord Supreme Wind! Lord Supreme Wind! The deafening cheers continued to resound, many people's eyes brimming with tears. One would not know how to cherish something if one had never lost it. This saying could be used in any situation. When the 9 Supremes were still around, when they were still contributing to the empire, when they were still fighting on the battlefield, everyone respected and revered them, knowing that there were 9 heroes. They were Yutong's guardian angel. However, it was only until they were gone that they truly realized what the 9 Supremes' protection had brought to Yutong. It had been more than a year since the 9 Supremes had met with mishap. War reports from all over had arrived like snowflakes. The entire empire was in a precarious state, with danger looming. Even ordinary families in Yutong had been affected. Along with the battle reports, there were also death notices. If the battle reports from all 4 sides were continuous snowflakes, the countless death notices would be a more violent blizzard. The Empire of Yutong was a nation that benefited from its military and was surrounded by enemies all over the world. The number of Yutong citizens who did not serve in the military was less than 11. Some families with a lot of men could easily send 7 or 8 men out. Every time the military subordinates started to distribute the list of the dead and distribute the compensation items, everyone would stretch their necks and wait anxiously. He was afraid that his name would be called, because once it was called, it would mean that one of his relatives had sacrificed his life for the country. However, this kind of waiting and worry had to wait until all the names were read out. Only after confirming that there were no more enemies could he truly be at ease. Then he would comfort those who were crying bitterly and go back to wait for the next batch of battle reports. Another round of waiting, another round of torment. Almost everyone had noticed the unprecedented frequency of the battle reports and the sudden increase in the number of deaths in the past year. Originally, when they were together, they would only say, "Have you heard?" In a very coincidental situation. It was said that someone's son from the neighboring village had died there. Then they would shake their heads and sigh, going about their own business, not hearing any similar news for a long time. However, this was not the case this year. Over the past year, there would be a batch of battle reports every once in a while. The people around him, the people he had met, the people in his neighborhood, the people he had seen with his own eyes. The countless lives he had seen with his own eyes had all turned into a piece of paper, never to be seen again. There were just too many of them. There was a family of 7 brothers who had joined the army to guard the land together. The family had only received a letter from the brothers 2 years ago. It was to report that all 7 brothers were alive and well. However, since last year, it had been basically once a month. Up until now, the family had already received 6 death notices. The poor old lady had already cried herself to death. The mountain people who could not even read a word clearly recognized this. The 9 Supremes. Yutong with the 9 Supremes and without the 9 Supremes was completely different. Previously, with the existence of the 9 Supremes, everyone could live and work in peace. Although it was still dangerous for their loved ones to join the army, it did not matter. They could just treat it as a long journey. They would come back one day. When they came back, it would be a family reunion. There were only so many casualties in a year. How could it be so unlucky as to fall on my family? On this point, it had almost become a common understanding. However, without the 9 Supremes now, every family who sent their children off to war felt the heartache of parting in life and death. Being and not being were two different things. As time passed, as the battles grew more frequent and intense, as the country's situation grew more precarious, as more and more people received death notices, everyone was reminiscing about the time when the 9 Supremes still existed. More and more people began to think, if the 9 Supremes Lords were still here, how could Yutong have suffered such a great defeat? So many soldiers had perished. If the 9 Supremes Lords were still here, my son wouldn't have died. If the 9 Supremes Lords were still here. Tai Zheng's battle at Tianxian Cliff had brought back news that there might still be someone alive among the 9 Supremes. The entire nation was in an uproar, but after such a long time, there had been no more accurate news. This made the people hesitate and disappointed. There were even more people who had new thoughts. Perhaps it was a ploy by the higher-ups to reassure the people. Today, however, they could finally see the 9 Supremes Lords with their own eyes. There were still people alive among the 9 Supremes Lords. At this moment, the wind blew in Yutong. No one could understand the agitation in the hearts of Yutong's people. The people were united, anticipating the reappearance of the 9 Supremes Lords to protect Yutong. The wind howled, gradually turning into a gigantic tornado in the air. It spun rapidly above Tiantang Square. It grew lower and lower. With a long howl, a black silhouette flashed in the air, turning into the image of a person dressed in black, with a black mask covering his face. The person landed lightly on the 200 feet tall flagpole, standing on one leg, his robe fluttering as he looked down. Qiu Jianhan gazed afar, meeting the pair of eyes from afar. His heart skipped a beat. How much desolation and solitude, how much desolation and hatred were contained in those eyes. He had come. Despite the sea of people below him and the tsunami-like cheers, he stood on the flagpole. His tall and straight body was like a sharp sword that pierced the heavens. However, he did not come down. Qiu Jianhan strode out and cupped his fists from afar. Is it Lord Supreme Wind who has arrived? Above the sky, the person in black on the flagpole raised his hand. Supreme Wind's medallion was in sight. Without waiting for Qiu Jianhan to speak, Supreme Wind sneered coldly and said, 9 Heavens Dictum, residents of 9 Supremes, the wind has come today to settle the feud. On the other side, the residents of 9 Supremes that was still vaguely visible suddenly shook without warning. 9 rainbows shot out abruptly. They soared straight into the sky. Red, orange, yellow, green, cyan, blue, purple, white, and black. The 9 rainbows circled above the blue sky like they were alive, soaring higher and higher like dragons. Slowly, they rose to a height that could not be seen by the naked eye and disappeared. Was this a miracle? Or was it a miracle? It could not be faked, nor could it be replicated. Lord Supreme Wind. It's really Lord Supreme Wind who has reappeared. The entire Tiantang city was in an uproar. When the wind had changed, the people in the square had already sensed it and were delighted. Chapter 251. If looks could kill, then Yang Butao would have already been minced into 1,000 pieces and dismembered. Yang Butao's face was ashen, but he was no better than a dead man. Since the moment Supreme Wind had appeared, he knew that he was done for. Any hope he had was in vain. Supreme Wind would rather put himself in danger in order to kill him first. Such staunchness and uncompromising attitude were eye-catching. Heroic and heroic, with no regrets in their hearts. Whatever they want to do, whatever they must do, that has always been the case. Why? I have nothing to say. Yang Butao sucked in a soft breath and chuckled bitterly. Lifting his head to look at Supreme Wind who was on top of the flagpole, he said hoarsely, I know that an apology can hardly mean anything, but I still have to say it. I'm sorry. A cold smile hung on his face behind the mask. The lives of 808 brothers. An apology? You're sorry, is really amazing. Yang Butao, you've been blessed by the Emperor. You joined the army when you were young, fighting on the battlefield, going through hundreds of battles and achieving the rank of marshal. These are all facts, they can't be erased and I have no intention of doing so. Supreme Wind's voice carried a sonorous tone amidst the chilly wind. I wonder if Marshal Yang still remembers the saying that has been passed down in Yutong's army for years. Live as Yutong's man, die as Yutong's soul. Below, there was only silence. All the soldiers had a calm look on their faces. I'm not willing to erase Marshal Yang's past achievements because I believe that Marshal Yang has carried out this saying before. Supreme Wind's tone was thick with confusion. But it's because of this that I'm even more puzzled. Why? No matter how you look at it, you have no reason to betray us. How can a mere apology be enough to end this karma? Yang Butao chuckled bitterly. Other than being sorry, I have nothing else to say. I have nothing else to explain to Lord Supreme Wind. He took a deep breath. Standing up, he said loudly, since it has come to this today, any excuses are meaningless. I'm a man. I dare to take responsibility for what I've done. I was the one who did what happened back then. Yang Butao hadn't finished speaking when curses and curses sounded out from below, and words of resentment rose and fell without end. Yang Butao wanted to continue but a voice suddenly hollered, "Do it!" His voice was still ringing in his ears when 3 silhouettes that were faster than lightning leaped up from 3 different directions, heading straight for Supreme Wind who was on the flagpole. On the high platform, 2 faint silhouettes flew up as well, hollering, "How dare you, you scoundrel!" At the same time, there were dozens of people who suddenly rushed towards the high platform like ferocious tigers. These people were originally scattered in all directions. The 3 silhouettes who were the first to pounce had cold glints in their hands. They did not evade, but attacked head-on. It was obvious that the 3 of them did not take Yun Yang's strike seriously at all. They intended to break it and win, then kill Supreme Wind of the 9 Supremes in a single strike. However, at the next moment, the saber light that had been swiftly dispelled and even broken through, as expected, did not change at all. It maintained its original trajectory, completely ignoring the resistance that they had unleashed. The golden saber light and palm force that they had unleashed were completely ineffective, as if they did not exist at all. Only the saber light could be seen increasing in intensity. The 3 of them saw an unprecedented killing intent suddenly appearing in front of them, but they all shouted loudly in unison. Their bodies that were moving at an incredible speed were like ghosts swapping places with each other in the air. The 3 of them were in the midst of a high-speed charge in midair. It was not something that could be compared to moving on the ground. Although the 3 of them had only used shifting shadows to support each other once, their true cultivation base had already been exposed. They were pinnacle experts who possessed 10th perfection. The ability of any one of these 3 people was not inferior to Da Yuan's legend, Liang Yunqi, the Dragon of Clouds, who had perished in the residence of 9 Supremes. With such a lineup, it would be more than enough to assassinate the monarch of a country. However, they were not in a good state at the moment. There was a lot of fresh blood dripping from the 3 of them, as well as the pained moans from the 3 of them. Yun Yang's 1 style and 2 styles had successfully injured the 3 experts. He sighed inwardly as he succeeded. His 1 and 2 styles had taken advantage of the opponent's carelessness and the unparalleled sharpness of the saber in his hand, but he could only injure them and not kill them. After all, the difference in their cultivation base was too great. He had the will but not the strength. Thinking deeper, if the 3 people before him had not underestimated the enemy and had been prepared, not only would they have had the chance to avoid being injured, they would have even had the chance to counterattack. "What saber is this?" one of them blurted out. The reason why the 3 of them had failed was because of Yun Yang's divine edge, which was marvelous, but the main reason was that the divine edge was too sharp. Not only was it enough to compensate for Yun Yang's lack of cultivation base, it had also broken through the trio's mystical chi defense without any hindrance. How could the 3 of them not be shocked? They knew that this was not the time to ask questions, but they could not help asking anyway. "A saber that kills." It was not Yun Yang's reply, but the 2 elders who had charged up behind the trio. Both of them were dressed in loose robes with wide sleeves, their faces unsophisticated. They had actually interfered in between Yun Yang and the trio and attacked without any warning. The 2 of them had stopped the 4 Seasons Tower's 3 superb experts and were fighting in the air. Although the 3 superb experts from the 4 Seasons Tower were injured, their actual abilities were not greatly diminished. The 2 elders who had come later had forcefully stopped the trio. Although it was 2 against 3, they were not at a disadvantage. This at least meant that these 2 men were at least of a similar level.
On the other side, the Four Seasons Tower's men had knocked Yang Buotao out at once and carried him on their backs. However, they could not simply charge out. Putting aside the fact that Tai Zheng was already charging forward with his target locked on Yang Buotao, it was already difficult for Yutong's 4 armies to break through the encirclement. The person who had knocked Yang Buotao out had obviously planned this. Even if Yun Yang wanted to stop him, he was too far away, unable to do so. Catch! The person tossed Yang Buotao out like a whirlwind. The deicide bow archer was already on standby, but the unexpected turn of events had happened. The speed at which the opponent had tossed Yang Buotao out was too fast. Even with the deicide bow archer's reflexes, he did not manage to shoot in time. After all, the stage was surrounded by citizens. If the sniper's arrow did not work, it would definitely affect the crowd below. At this moment, Yang Buotao's body was already more than 100 feet away. His momentum gradually slowed down, but he saw a person suddenly jump out from the crowd and catch his body. Then, with a forceful push, this body of more than 200 kilograms was once again sent flying like an arrow. This time, however, Yang Buotao's luck was no longer on his side. Swoosh! A cold, black shadow flashed past as a string of blood splattered in the air. Those with better eyesight looked over and saw that it was a mystical steel arrow that had pierced through Yang Buotao's thigh. The deicide bow archers were not to be trifled with. Due to the sudden turn of events and the concern of accidentally injuring the citizens, they could not shoot at once. However, how could such an escape mode be repeated? One of the deicide bow archers who was closer fired a shot. The arrow hit, but it was a pity that it only hit the thigh and did not take his life. However, another silhouette appeared on the other side. As he caught Yang Buotao, he hurled him out once more. Tai Zheng roared and pushed the people around him away. He leaped onto the stage and howled, "Yang Buotao!" The bow in his hand was already knocked with an arrow. Looking down from above, it was a soul-chasing arrow. "I'll use my life to create an opening in your defense and drag you along with me. I dare to die, but do you dare?" Besieging from all sides, sacrificing one side. The people on this side would risk their lives to tie down these experts. Then, the brothers on the other 3 sides would use their spears to stab themselves and the enemy to death. This was undoubtedly the cruelest way of fighting. However, it was also the most effective way to deal with experts. When experts exchanged blows, the slightest difference could lead to 1,000 miles of error. Therefore, experts were always fighting for the difference of a split second. A split second could determine life and death. Now, the soldiers in the army were using their lives as an opportunity, using their lives as a temporary restraint, forming many moments of difference. As long as any one of these moments of difference was caught, even if one was an expert, even if one's cultivation base was profound, one's body and one's life would only have one life. A few cries of agony could be heard. Those were a dozen Four Seasons Tower 7th and 8th level experts, who were pierced by the spears and completely lost the ability to resist under such an unreasonable, desperate fight. Dozens of soldiers leaped from their brothers' shoulders, brandishing their sabers, pouncing forward like dumplings. One was sent flying, kicked away, followed by another, and another. No matter how agile and timely one's reaction was, one who was already being restrained, as long as one of them was unable to send flying in time, that moment of delay would cause 5 or 6 people to press down on one of them. Following that, hundreds of spears would stab in from all directions. If there was really no gap, they would grit their teeth and tear through their comrades, wanting to stab their targets to death. This was because everyone knew very well. As long as these fallen people stood up again, all the previous sacrifices would be meaningless. All previous efforts would be wasted. Then, they could only fight to the end, until the target was killed. Avenge the 9 Supremes. Annihilate the traitors. Fight to the last man. Tai Zheng hollered with his arms raised. He could see everything clearly from his vantage point on the stage. Tai Zheng did not even use his bow and arrows, throwing his weapons continuously to attack the enemy. Tai Zheng's domineering strength was on full display at this moment. Due to his vantage point, the accuracy of his attacks formed a beautiful line of attack. Due to the participation of the 4 armies, the scene was chaotic beyond words. However, the 5 people who were fighting high up in the sky had stopped fighting. While the 3 men from the Four Seasons Tower were severely injured and bleeding profusely, the other 2 men could not keep the 3 of them down. There was also Supreme Wind, who was originally standing on top of the flagpole, had disappeared without anyone noticing.
The main target of this battle was gone. What else could they fight for? The battle in the sky could stop, but when the three men looked down, they knew that things were not looking good.
The 27 to 28 men who had followed Yang Buotao here, other than the men who had been waiting in ambush who had disappeared, had all fallen into Yutong's 4 armies' encirclement.
None of them would be able to escape. Even if they went down to help, it would be futile. They might even suffer the same fate and be sent to the netherworld.
The mountains are high and the rivers are long. We shall meet again. The 3 of them spat out their last words and turned to leave.
Who would have thought that just as they left the area of the flag in the sky, countless deicide magnetite arrows would come at them without a break?
Fortunately, the cultivation of these 3 people was indeed not ordinary. They forcefully gathered a breath of vitality and climbed to a higher position. They walked on the void all the way, and only then did they escape the arrow rain-killing formation of the god-slaying mysterious iron arrows.
With the departure of the 3 10th perfection experts, the chaotic battle in Tiantang Square gradually came to an end.
There were only 7 to 8 9th peak experts who were still resisting with all their might, but they could not hold on for much longer. Other than knowing that the 3 perfection experts who were seen as their last hope had already escaped and there was no possibility of help, it was also because these soldiers had all gone mad.
Cultivators who could reach the 9th peak and above were all knowledgeable people. They had traveled extensively and seen countless armies, but they had never seen an army like this.
There was only one word in each of their mouths: revenge.
With the abilities of 9th peak cultivators, a troop of soldiers was nothing but a joke to them.
They could annihilate them with a wave of their hands. There was no possibility of them getting close, let alone engaging in close combat. However, they were now in the midst of the army. All they could see was such ordinary soldiers charging towards them with spears in their hands.
They were everywhere. What should they do? They could only rely on their own cultivation base and skill to resist, counter, and evade in a small area. Against such a situation, the so-called mystical skill, skillful shifting, and leveraging force were all a joke. There was no room for them to use them. As for flying up high, it was impossible because once he did so, he would become a live target. There were thousands of deicide bows in Yutong Square that were aimed right at him. What was worse was that these soldiers were not afraid of friendly fire. They were only afraid of not getting hurt. To kill one of their own, they could charge up to 100, 500, or even 1,000 without hesitation. They only hoped to kill one of them. Chapter 253. It was not only Tai Zhang. Even old Marshal Qiu Jianhan and Leng Daoyin were covered in blood. How could the 2 old generals miss such a battle?
In fact, it was thanks to their extraordinary cultivation base that each of them had managed to fend off an expert from the enemy.
It was also because of their experience commanding that the situation of the battle was even more favorable, finally annihilating all of the 4 Seasons Tower's experts. Count the casualties and losses. Tai Zheng's expression was grim. These ambushers were all dead, but Yang Buotao's fate was unknown. From the fact that he had been rescued, the outcome of the public trial could be considered a failure. Moreover, the number of casualties today was going to be a shocking one. Casualties.
After a long time, an assistant general rubbed his eyes and said in a low voice, 6,342 brothers who died in the battle.
Among them, Wan Fenggue, Wang Dezhu, Wei Dexu. The 3 generals have all perished. In addition, the muscles on Tai Zheng's face twitched. How many enemies? 28 of them killed. 28 of them. The muscles on Tai Zheng's face were twitching madly. Just these 28 people took away 6,342 of my brothers? He turned his head slowly and looked at the bloodied faces around him. For a moment, his heart was heavy. He had only been focused on annihilating the enemy earlier and had not thought about the casualties on his side.
Although Tai Zhang had expected the heavy casualties on his side, he was still pained when he heard that they had actually suffered such a heavy loss.
Marshal Tai. This humble officer thinks that even if the brothers who died in this battle, they will feel gratified. Their deaths will be worth it.
A fellow who had lost an arm and an ear stood up with all his might.
The injured brothers will also feel that it's worth it. Gratifying. Around them, countless wounded soldiers cheered in unison. That's right. Worth it. Gratifying. Because we have done something for the 9 Supremes Lords after all.
The soldiers looked solemn. Before this, it has always been the 9 Supremes Lords who have shielded us from the wind and rain, saving us from danger and death. We have never done our part for the 9 Supremes Lords.
Now that we're facing their enemies, we're willing to put our lives on the line no matter how hard we fight. Tai Zhang heaved a long sigh towards the sky.
Suddenly, he laughed with tears in his eyes. 9 Supremes Lords, our brothers have avenged all of you.
Do you see this? Qiu Jianhan was panting heavily when he saw a guard rushing in. He called out to him. What happened? This guard was the person that he had left behind to pass on the news. Why would he come in such a hurry? Could it be that something had happened? The guard said anxiously. The fire in Yang Buotao's residence was so intense that it couldn't be extinguished. It was Madame Yang who poured all the kerosene in the residence onto the blankets and other things. The entire Yang residence, 71 people, none of them survived. Qiu Jianhan shuddered while Tai Zhang turned abruptly as well, looking at the guard with a complicated expression. Madame Yang must have gathered everyone beforehand and drank the poison. The guard was a little frightened. There was only a parcel pressed against a rock in the courtyard. Inside is a letter. The guard presented a letter with both hands. There were a few delicate words on it. To old Marshal Qiu. Qiu Jianhan's eyes were rimmed with tears as he accepted it with trembling hands. He tore the seal off and unfolded it. Uncle, this niece bids farewell today. This niece has been the wife of a hero for half my life. It's enough. I don't think that I've embarrassed my parents. I won't be a sinful wife even at the last moment. I'm willing to die with honor, to live without humiliation. This niece doesn't know about Yang Buotao. Uncle, don't be ashamed of this niece. In front of my parents' graves, I hope that uncle can discern for me. This unfilial daughter bids farewell. Qiu Jianhan's hands were trembling as tears streamed down his cheeks. This was the daughter left behind by the brother who had died on the battlefield. The last words he left behind in his life were to defend himself. I didn't know. If I had known, there would have been a different outcome. I didn't let you down. I didn't let my parents down. I didn't let you Tong down. Lang Daoyin leaned over to take a look and sighed deeply, saying in a low voice, It's the child left behind by San Lang. Qiu Jianhan's eyes were brimming with hot tears. Pack up and report to His Majesty as soon as possible. On the same afternoon, the imperial edict was announced. Yang Buotao had colluded with the enemy and betrayed the country. His crime was unpardonable. He had conspired to murder the 9 Supremes and caused their deaths, plunging the empire into a precarious situation. The fugitive Yang, if discovered, could be executed by anyone. Anyone who reported Traitor Yang's whereabouts would be rewarded with 1,000 silver taels. Those who killed Traitor Yang would be rewarded with 10,000 gold taels and be made a marquis of 10,000 households. That was the general meaning of the edict. The northern troop was reorganized from top to bottom. His Majesty had personally decreed that the eastern marshal, Tai Zhang, was to be transferred to the north along with his accompanying officers. The position of the eastern marshal would be temporarily taken over by the eastern troops' assistant marshal. This transfer was a last resort. The northern troops' morale was low now. They needed a strong marshal to reunite them before they could be put to use. Other than Tai Zhang, there was no other person in the entire empire of Yutong at this stage. On the same night, Tai Zhang brought a few janissaries and stepped into the northern troops' military camp. Yang Buotao's janissaries and subordinates had long been under control. Fortunately, these people were well behaved and did not resist, which saved them a lot of trouble. Once Tai Zhang arrived, he was the first to request to see these people. The northern military camp was currently shrouded in an indescribable atmosphere of deathly stillness. All Tai Zhang could see were the gazes of people who were on the brink of death. They were filled with despair and sorrow. All 500 of Yang Buotao's janissaries were there. All of them were filled with the will to die. The will to die did not belong to anyone else but themselves. Everyone gather. Tai Zhang walked in with large strides and commanded loudly, his voice reverberating throughout the place. As soon as the order was given, the 500 men, though their expressions were weary and their spirits were even more dispirited, they still gathered together swiftly. From this, it could be seen that this group of people were the cream of the crop. As the janissaries of the marshal, how could they be qualified if they did not possess a certain level of capability, loyalty, and self-awareness to follow orders? Tai Zhang could not help but be even more certain of his earlier decision, but his face was still dark as he walked to a higher spot. His body was already taller than an ordinary person's, but he liked to stand on high ground. Now that he was looking down from above, He seemed even taller and stronger. He looked like an iron tower, standing there majestically. "Why are all of you lowering your heads?" Tai Zheng hollered. "Raise your heads." There was still silence below. Not many of them had lifted their heads. Tai Zheng scoffed and said, "Are you all rebelling? Didn't you hear the military order I gave just now? All of you, raise your heads with your chests up. Everyone look at me." Military law was absolute. Since Tai Zheng was the highest commanding officer here, his order was a military order. Everyone present had to execute it unconditionally, without any hesitation. With this command, all 500 of them raised their heads with their chests up, their gazes focused on Tai Zheng. Whether these 500 janissaries were willing or unwilling, all they could see at this moment was Tai Zheng's mighty image. "I don't want to say too much about pretty words and threats," Tai Zheng said, "although Yang Butao's crimes are unpardonable, this person still has a bottom line after all. He didn't bring anyone from the military with him at the last moment. No matter how heinous his crimes are, it's good that he didn't drag any of you into this during today's public trial. At least he still has a shred of conscience."
As expected of a real man.
Tai Zheng said, "All of you are his janissaries, this can't be changed. However, regarding Yang Butao's betrayal of the 9 Supremes Lords, I believe that none of you are involved. He would never dare complete such a thing through your hands. If it were me, I would have done it myself. The implications of this matter are too great. No matter how much I trust all of you, there will always be concerns. Therefore, this must be Yang Butao's doing alone. It has nothing to do with all of you. All of you don't have to look dead now. No one says what to do to all of you. After all, other than being Yang Butao's janissaries, all of you are soldiers of the Northern Troop and Yutong's military men. This cannot be denied." Once Tai Zheng said this, everyone's eyes shone. "Now, I'll give all of you the chance to choose freely. The first choice is those who are willing to follow Yang Butao and stay by his side through life and death. You can step out now and I won't hold you accountable. I'll respect your feelings and choices. However, your military status will be revoked and you'll become a free man from now on, free to live or die as you please. The second choice is that I, Tai Zheng, have come to lead the Northern Troop under the Emperor's order. I've only brought less than 30 men with me, so I lack janissaries of my own, janissaries who can accompany me on the battlefield to kill the enemy and entrust my back to them. If all of you are willing to become my janissaries, I'll gladly accept it. As for the third choice, it's to remove your original identity as janissaries, disband the organization and join the army. You can start from the bottom and slowly prove your loyalty to the Empire of Yutong on the battlefield." "I choose the third choice."
The janissary general raised his hand and said, "Join the army and start from the bottom."
Tai Zheng's eyes shone as he focused his gaze on the general. He had said, "I" and not "we." This was tantamount to leaving room for his other brothers to choose. After all, if they chose to become Tai Zheng's janissaries, they could prove themselves as well. After the first person had voiced out his choice, more and more people stepped forward to choose the third option. Finally, 471 men stood out from the 500 men, all of them choosing the third option.
However, there were still 29 men who stood where they were, their expressions blank and blank.
Tai Zheng asked, "What's your choice?" A tall man with a face full of scars stood up and said, "I choose the first option." Tai Zheng's gaze froze.
It was unknown if it was because the man with a face full of scars had spoken up first, but the other 28 men followed suit and said, "We choose the first option as well."
Tai Zheng nodded slowly and said, "All right. Clerk, record these 29 men and process them according to the normal discharge procedures. Issue them a return ticket and revoke their military status. They will leave the army from now on. Pass my order as well. No one is allowed to trouble them with the excuse of being Yang Butao's janissaries. Those who disobey will be severely punished." "Yes. Thank you, Marshal Tai." Chapter 254. The tall leader said, "It's not that we are unwilling to serve the country, it's just that."
He sighed and said, "There's no need for the money to return home.
We are eternally grateful for Marshal Tai's order today. We bid our farewells here." As his words trailed off, he led his brothers out of the camp.
The 471 men who had chosen to start over from the bottom stood silently, sending off their brothers who had chosen to leave with their gazes.
Just like Tai Zhang had said, there was no regret for those who stayed, no guilt for those who left. Everyone had their own ambitions and followed their own hearts. Tai Zheng's gaze was trained on the Janissary general who puffed up his chest and said, "Don't blame us, Marshal Tai.
As Marshal Yang's Janissary, if we were to be taken in by Marshal Tai as your Janissary, even if the brothers of the northern troop won't be dissatisfied with the marshal, we won't be able to rest easy.
We're willing to kill the enemy and start over. To us, as long as we can fight on the battlefield again, it's enough." Tai Zheng sighed.
He knew the meaning of the Janissary general's words. Although he had stated clearly that these Janissary soldiers had not participated in framing the Nine Supremes and should not be punished for it, Yutong's soldiers and military brothers did not know the reason. If they saw the Janissary soldiers who had followed the treacherous officials become the new favorite Janissary of the northern troop succeeding marshal, how could they not feel resentful? Oh, how could those who had made a mistake continue to enjoy their original treatment? There was no such logic. "Very well. I respect your individual choices," Tai Zheng said. "Collect your names and military records later. Start all over again from the lowest rank. I'll only say this once more. From now on, we shall walk this journey together and not speak of the past. From now on, the northern troop's surname is Tai." Tai Zheng lifted his head and spoke in a faint but resolute tone. "Pass down my military order. The northern troop will set up a new training camp. The original training content will be doubled. The northern troop's training base will be expanded immediately. Within a month, I want to see 30,000 trained soldiers to join the war at the northern border. If the soldiers who are on duty do not meet the combat requirements, the training general will be beheaded. If there's any disturbance in the northern barracks within Yutong's borders, the commanding general will be beheaded immediately without any chance to defend himself. Tomorrow, assemble 10,000 soldiers and follow me to the northern frontier. This battle is directed at the empire's northern border. I, Tai Zheng, shall flatten the northern border. I shall not return without victory." That afternoon, Tai Zheng patrolled the northern troops' camp for the first time, gathering the high-ranking generals for a lecture. On the same night, the eastern troop gathered a list of 1,000 people that Tai Zheng needed and had them report to the northern troop immediately. All of them were then dismissed and returned home to reunite with their families. The next morning, the sky had just brightened. Tai Zheng led an army of 10,000 men and officially departed, galloping towards the northern border. That very night, 17 of Yang Buotao's 29 personal guards committed suicide in front of the ruins of Yang Buotao's old house. The other 12 were nowhere to be found. If Yang Buotao had died because he was wronged or because he had no other choice, then the number of people who sacrificed their lives would probably increase by several times. However, it was true that Yang Buotao had betrayed the Nine Supremes and his crime of treason. In the end, only these 17 people died here, paying with their lives. Even so, these 17 corpses that still stood erect still caused a stir in the capital city. Qiu Jianhan personally ordered the burial and sighed. Such a good man, yet he ended up like this. It's a pity. Sigh. No matter what reason Yang Buotao had for killing the Nine Supremes, his conduct as a marshal of an army is indeed worthy of his reputation.
That afternoon, Yun Yang chased after Yang Buotao all the way out of Tiantang City. Initially, Yun Yang had thought that Yang Buotao's betrayal of the Nine Supremes was exposed and his act of treason was obvious. He was no longer of any value to the Four Seasons Tower and was completely abandoned. Whether it was on the surface or the inside, to Yutong, to the Four Seasons Tower, to the Nine Supremes, or even to himself, there was no chance of survival left. However, the Four Seasons Tower's combat power had unexpectedly come to his rescue. Many experts of the Seventh Peak and above who had died in this battle could be said to have died because of Yang Buotao. This was completely illogical, especially not in line with the Four Seasons Tower's conduct. Unless Yang Buotao had something that Yun Yang and the Empire of Yutong did not know about. Whether this was his identity, background, or some kind of secret, it was unknown. However, since this was worthy of the Four Seasons Tower's attention, the place that Yang Buotao was going to next must be one of the Four Seasons Tower's bases. Such a base was what Yun Yang yearned for the most. How could he let it go? Yun Yang utilized the power of wind and cloud at the same time. It looked like the biting cold wind was urging the white cloud in the sky to travel at lightning speed. But the white cloud that Yun Yang had transformed into was actually moving on its own, traveling even faster with the wind. It was also because of this that Yun Yang realized the answer to a question that he had not figured out before. Yun Yang had always been confident about his own safety. Even if the Four Seasons Tower really had the ability to go to heaven, it was impossible for them to set up a spiritual ceiling formation like the one at Tianxian Cliff under Tiantang Square overnight. On the day of the public trial, as long as he did not go down to join the battle, he, who had the 5 abilities, could change his form at any time and would not be afraid of any ambush. What Yun Yang could not understand was why the Four Seasons Tower was so confident. They did not take any additional action and allowed the public trial to proceed smoothly. Was it just to let Supreme Wind appear? If that was the case, did it not mean that they had the confidence to kill Supreme Wind the moment he appeared? However, what would they use to complete the kill? Before going to Tiantang Square, Yun Yang had not figured out the answer. However, the moment he arrived at Tiantang Square, Yun Yang acutely felt a threat that came from the sky. The sense of threat was unprecedentedly strong, but only Ling Xiaozui's domineering aura the other day could be stronger. In other words, the source of this threat was a superb expert, a pinnacle expert who had surpassed the level of 10th perfection. However, Yun Yang was not the least bit afraid. His cultivation base had improved tremendously and was no longer comparable to the time when he faced He Han Qing. Furthermore, he was already prepared to turn into the wind and leave at any time. Once he willed it, no one would be able to catch him. However, when he tailed the expert who had saved Yang Buotao all the way out of the city, Yun Yang finally realized what he had been afraid of, or rather, the Four Seasons Tower's real killer move against Supreme Wind was. Behind him, there was a saber shadow that seemed to have turned into a green color, tailing the gust of wind that he had transformed into. If it was not for Emmy's support that increased the observation ability of his deific consciousness, he would not have realized that there was a saber hidden in the sky. He circulated the power of wind and cloud at the same time. One of the forces moved forward as the wind while his body blended into the white clouds in the sky, traveling with the wind. As for the saber light, it had been tailing behind the cold wind, neither too fast nor too slow, neither too close nor too far away. Yun Yang had changed the speed of the wind a few times, whether it was slow or fast, but the saber light had maintained its inseparable state, tailing him just like that. In any case, it had used some unknown method to lock on to the force of his wind transformation. Yun Yang's heart skipped a beat. Was this the Four Seasons Tower's ultimate killer move? If he was really 8th Brother Supreme Wind, he would only have the ability of the wind manifestation. He did not know if the hidden saber light really had the power to annihilate the wind manifestation. As long as he followed it like this, when his mystical chi cultivation base was exhausted and he had no choice but to return to his human form from his wind manifestation, it would be the time he would be killed by the saber. Thinking of this, Yun Yang was struck with a flash of inspiration. He recalled what Mi Kongquan had said to him before he died when he had killed him. Right, be careful. There's a saber in the sky. Yun Yang had not understood what it meant before this. There was a saber in the sky? How could there be a saber in the sky? Now, however, he understood. There was indeed a saber in the sky. It was a saber that had no shape or form at all. Now, at this very moment, this saber was the Four Seasons Tower's ultimate weapon to kill him. Yun Yang believed that in the eyes of this saber, Yun Yang, who had transformed into the wind, had been completely locked onto. He was now a child in the palm of the saber, a fish on the anvil at his mercy. As long as he continued to wait, he could wait for the wind to return to its human form and confirm the identity of the target. He would then know if the target had any other henchmen. Only then would he carry out the finishing move, uprooting and annihilating them once and for all. Why doesn't he do it now? If he were to follow me for such a long distance, there might be changes. Even if my cultivation base is shallow and I don't notice it, it's impossible for me to not notice it all the time. On the contrary, if my manifestation is broken, I won't be able to escape his grasp and I'll definitely be captured. Why go through so much trouble? Yes, even if he could completely lock on to the wind manifestation, he wouldn't be able to break the wind manifestation directly. Yun Yang pondered and came to a conclusion. Then, is this saber in the sky a person? Or is it only a saber being controlled by a person? In front of them, the person who had rescued Yang Buotao from the public trial was still carrying Yang Buotao on his back and was still sprinting forward. His speed was exactly the same as before and had not slowed down at all. They were now 200 miles away from Tiantang City. However, the person was still sprinting forward. There was a tall mountain in front of them, and on top of it was a dense forest. The person was moving very quickly, running at full speed without holding back. Yun-yang even noticed that the person had spat out a mouthful of blood as he ran, but instead of slowing down, he was running even faster. This meant that the person was using some sort of self-mutilation to forcefully propel himself to maintain his high speed. It was almost as if he was risking his life. Was it because Yang Buotao was too important, or? Yun-yang's heart skipped a beat. Could it be that the other side in front is their real trap against me? Was the action in Tiantang Square just a pretense? That's right, it's indeed easy to set up some strange formations in such a desolate place. Chapter 255. They had sacrificed Yang Buotao, the marshal of the northern troop, 30 experts from the Four Seasons Tower, and sent out a mysterious saber in the sky to set up a fatal trap at a faraway place. This trap was very ingenious and targeted. This person who had saved Yang Buotao's life was escaping. Based on the current situation, no one else could catch up to him. Even if someone did, they would be killed by that saber. Only Supreme Wind's wind attribute manifestation could possibly catch up to him. As long as Supreme Wind caught up, the plan would be considered half completed. As for Yang Buotao, he was burdened with the blood feud of murdering the 9 Supremes. How could Supreme Wind not chase after the target of Supreme Wind's reappearance? Even if he knew the risk, he would still give chase. Therefore, this targeted plan was indeed flawless and flawless. Furthermore, if Yun-yang was only Supreme Wind and only had the power of wind manifestation, he would not even be able to notice the saber that was locked onto him from behind. That would be the end. It was a pity that the culprit of the wind manifestation was not Supreme Wind but Supreme Cloud. The so-called flawless targeted trap had a huge loophole. Yun-yang quickly came to a conclusion that there must be a trap in front of him. It was very likely to be a trap like the one at Tianxian Cliff that could lock down and restrict the manifestation ability, the spiritual ceiling formation. This was also the opponent's main killing move against Supreme Wind. Even if there was an accident and the spiritual ceiling formation could not kill him in the end, it would not matter. The saber that was following him would become a backup and continue to follow him. He could not maintain the wind manifestation forever. Once his mystical qi cultivation base was exhausted, he would have to return to his human form eventually. Once he did so, he would die as well. In addition, the opponent must be thinking of following the clues to get rid of the threat once and for all. Yun-yang's mind raced, planning how to deal with the current crisis. Now, he had changed from being a hunter to being hunted. The situation was precarious and he had to think of a way to deal with it. There was no doubt that Heaven's Saber's cultivation base was unfathomable. What was more frightening was that Yun-yang did not even know how high this person's level was. Yun-yang was not even sure if Supreme Lord Spring Frost, He Han-Qing, had such a cultivation base when he was at his peak. Although He Han-Qing had heavily injured Yun-yang who was in his wind manifestation with a single palm strike, it had been an unexpected turn of events and Yun-yang had just broken through. It was inevitable that he had been high-spirited and careless. More importantly, Yun-yang had just broken through to the 5th peak then and his manifestation cultivation base was only at the 4th level at most. Now, not only had his cultivation base increased tremendously, his manifestation cultivation base had also improved tremendously. Moreover, he was fully focused and cautious at all times. In such a state, Yun-yang was confident that even if he were to face He Han-Qing, it would not be a problem for him to escape unscathed even if he still could not defeat him in a direct confrontation. In spite of this, the saber in the sky had locked onto and tracked Yun-yang like a maggot in a tarsal bone. It was not far from him, neither too fast nor too slow. Yun-yang was already shocked and terrified by it. Yun-yang even suspected that he would need to be at the level of Ling Xiaozue, Jun Moyan, and Dugu Cho to have such an ability. Even if there was still a gap, it would not be very far. With his current cultivation base, whether he could escape the pursuit of the saber in the sky or not, as long as his true identity was exposed, not only Yun-yang himself, but the entire residence of Yun would be annihilated. Yun-yang believed that even if the residence of Yun combined all of its combat power, it would still not be a match for the saber. This was the Four Seasons Tower's true ability. However, how was he going to deal with this person? To Yun-yang, it was not difficult to simply escape. He was not Supreme Wind after all. He only had the wind manifestation power, especially now that he still had the advantage. Now that he had the initiative and discovered the other party, it was not difficult for him to break away from the other party's pursuit. However, if he did so, Yang Buotao would definitely be able to escape. This was something that Yun Yang could not accept and was unwilling to do. Today, he had reappeared as one of the 9 Supremes with the ultimate goal of targeting Yang Buotao. If he were to escape, not only would it be a waste of effort, it would be a huge loss. How would he be able to face his brother's coffins? Yun Yang steeled his heart. He could not watch Yang Buotao being rescued, no matter what. This person had to die. The enemy who killed his brothers had already been caught by him, so he had to die. If he were to let the tiger return to the mountain today, he did not know when he would be able to see it again. Yun Yang carefully separated a strand of his attention to continue controlling the howling wind. He was still drifting with the white clouds, but he was deliberately and covertly gathering the clouds from all directions, slowly gathering them together, causing the sky to gradually darken. It looked like it was about to rain. Lightning began to flicker slowly in the clouds. Yun Yang was multitasking, using his various skills to weave a beautiful, hidden setup. However, the gale did not show any signs of slowing down, continuing to chase after the black silhouette in front until it rushed into the forest on the other end. When the gale entered the forest, there was a faint mystical saber light in the sky. However, the saber light disappeared in a flash, as if it had never existed. It was as if it had returned to waiting. Half of his mission had been completed. He only needed to wait for the follow-up results. Supreme Wind had already chased after the person into the forest. What followed next was the matter on the other side. Even if the formation on the other side could not kill Supreme Wind would still turn into the wind and escape in the end. As long as he turned into the wind and escaped, Yun Yang would be able to track him immediately since he had already locked onto his aura, all the way to his lair. Perhaps he could wait until the moment when his mystical chi was exhausted. Whether it was to eliminate the root of the problem or to kill Supreme Wind alone, Supreme Wind was dead for sure. Although he had promised Ice to bring Yang Buotao back alive, if Yang Buotao were to be killed before he could do anything, he could only blame it on his bad luck. The priority of this mission was to kill the 9 Supremes. The forest was filled with plants, so the visibility was much lower than on flat ground. What was more, the sudden shroud of dark clouds made the surroundings so dark that one could not even see their own fingers. In spite of this, the black silhouette still carried Yang Buotao and moved forward quickly without any delay. It was obvious that he was very familiar with the terrain of the forest. The howling of the wind suddenly increased in volume. Yang Buotao, who was lying on the back of the black silhouette, was still unconscious. There was a transparent hole on his thigh, where an arrow from the deicide bow had pierced through his thigh, taking away a section of his femur bone. If there was no special bone-forging technique, Yang Buotao would inevitably be crippled for life. There was another mystical steel arrow stuck on his waist, only half of the shaft exposed. Yang Buotao was wearing a soft armor made of an unusual material, but the mystical steel arrow had been shot by Tai Zhang with all his might. It had actually pierced through the soft armor and pierced into Yang Buotao's body. Looking at the depth, it had already entered the abdominal cavity. The gale was like a knife, causing the entire forest to emit a strange sound that resembled the wailing of ghosts and the howling of deities. Countless tree branches snapped, hitting the black silhouette and Yang Buotao like a thunderstorm. Blades of wind appeared out of nowhere and danced behind the two of them, showing off their sharpness. Amidst the darkness and chaos, the black figure was unable to dodge at all. He could only let out a wild roar and spit out a mouthful of blood. Green light blossomed from his body, and he used his pure profound chi cultivation to envelop both of their bodies. He mustered up his courage and continued to advance forward. However, his speed was inevitably slowed down. The black silhouette knew that the destination of the trap was at the top of the mountain. However, with his speed and Supreme Wind's constant attacks, it would be difficult for him to make it to the top of the mountain. OL 4th Qiao. The black silhouette increased the circulation of mystical chi, maintaining his defensive state. As he sprinted upwards with all his might, he suddenly shouted, "Come down and pick me up." On the top of the mountain, someone answered. Then, the rapid sound of the wind could be heard. The change was within the black silhouette's expectations. After Supreme Wind had sensed his call for help, he had pushed the wind attribute attack to its maximum limit. It was obvious that he wanted to kill both himself and Yang Buotao before the black silhouette's reinforcements arrived. It seemed that Supreme Wind really hated Yang Buotao to the core and would not rest until he was dead. Even though he understood this, the black silhouette was powerless. If he was at his peak, he would be able to fight Supreme Wind's Windblade encirclement.
Even if he could not, it would not be a problem for him to hold on until the reinforcements arrived or to the top of the mountain. However, he had fought his way out of Tiantang's city. He had even borrowed the advantage of being in the outermost layer, sprinting all the way down from the city wall. Up till now, he had forcefully activated the life force arcane art twice. He was already at the end of his tether. If he was not at the end of his tether, why would he have to call for help? He might not be able to defend himself against a fifth peak cultivator's attack now. The wind blades flew wildly. Finally, with a pop, the mystical cheese air shield broke while the expert spat out a mouthful of blood. He staggered, carrying Yang Buotao on his back as he crashed into a big tree. The mouthful of blood was not the price of forcefully activating the arcane art. He was seriously injured. The black silhouette was finally exhausted, unable to hold on any longer. However, the sound of the wind was still shrill as the wind blades continued to fall. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. With a flash of cold light, blood splattered. The black silhouette expert who had been carrying Yang Buotao on his back had actually cried out before his head was separated from his body, heading to the underworld. At the same time that the black silhouette expert had perished, a gush of warmth flowed into Yun Yang's senses. It was the chi of injustice. Yun Yang snorted softly as he materialized again. Above him, another black silhouette shot over like an arrow. Supreme Wind. You live up to your reputation indeed. Take this. With that said, he turned around and left. He couldn't stay any longer. If he stayed any longer, he would probably die here as well. Yang Buotao's mind was in a trance as he watched a cyan gas swirl down from the sky and land in front of him. It was a cyan silhouette, ethereal and indistinct. He could not help but ask, "May I ask if Supreme Wind is here in person?" Yun Yang replied faintly, "Yang Buotao, what do you have to say to me?" Yang Buotao's earlier attack had injured the black silhouette, but he had also suffered from the reverse impact of the mystical chi. With his frail body that had been repeatedly injured, he was in a precarious situation. With just a slight struggle, the mystical steel arrow at his waist had almost split his upper and lower body into two. It was obvious that he would not survive. Spitting out mouthfuls of blood, he no longer had the air of a marshal of the northern troop. He stared at Yun Yang and said, "Lord Supreme Wind, is my wife." Yun Yang pondered and said, "You should know your wife's personality. Think about it yourself. How likely is it that she's still alive now?" Yang Buotao's gaze dimmed as he said, "I've let her down." Yun Yang said coldly, "Yang Buotao, you haven't let her down, nor have you let me down. But as a citizen of Yutong, don't you feel that you've let down this country? Let down the brothers who shouldn't have died but have died because of what you've done?" Yang Buotao's gaze dimmed as he said, "Now that things have come to this, there's no point in talking more." Yun Yang's murderous intent had long been uncontrollable. If Yang Buotao had not risked his life to attack the black silhouette, Yun Yang would not have given him a chance to speak. He said in a low voice, "You said you had something to tell me just now. Was it only to ask about your wife's whereabouts?" Yang Buotao chuckled with difficulty, blood trickling from the corners of his mouth as he said bitterly, "When I was young, my parents were kind and loving. My days were happy and peaceful. However, when I was 12, my mother passed away in an accident. My father was traumatized and disappeared. It was also that year that I entered the military. After so many years of war, I became the marshal of the northern troop. I, Yang Buotao, could be considered to have achieved success and recognition. I don't think I've disgraced my ancestors. It was until the year before last when my father found me. He looked haggard, like he didn't have long to live." Yang Buotao chuckled miserably and said, "At the time, I reunited with my family after a long separation. Other than being overjoyed, I also lamented that I wanted to raise my son but my parents weren't around. I waited by my father's bedside for months and even missed a great battle. However, there was only one wish in my heart then. As long as my father could recover, I, Yang Buotao, would willingly die for it, even if I, Yang Buotao, had to die a horrible death." Chapter 257. Yang Buotao's expression was mournful as he chuckled bitterly. "If it were someone else, I wouldn't believe it, but it was my father. My biological father. My father had also asked me to check his dantian.
I've checked and there's really a plant with 9 leaves in his dantian. Once I checked, I felt that my cultivation base has improved. It's not a lie. If it's not a peerless treasure, how could it be so miraculous? My father said that there are 2 of you now. The first one is to let me eat this herb so that I can live forever. However, the rainbow herb is something that the heavens are jealous of. It must be plucked before the host dies, and before it is plucked, the host cannot commit suicide. In other words, I need to kill my own father in order to obtain the rainbow herb of the 9 firmament. As for the second option, it's to exchange the 9-beam rainbow herb for the 9 supremes' help. The reason my father is suffering from such an injury is because he's nurtured this herb. This herb is envied by the heavens, and only by gathering the 9 energies can he escape this disaster and let my father live. My father finished and said that I'll choose between the 2 options. No matter what I choose, my father won't have any complaints. The more Yang Buotao spoke, the more excited he became and the smoother his speech became. A tinge of redness appeared on her originally pale face. Yun Yang sighed, knowing that Yang Buotao was already in a state of terminal lucidity. He could die at any time, his soul going to the netherworld. I'm ashamed to say this. I hesitated then, fantasizing about becoming an eternal immortal. Yang Buotao chuckled bitterly, but I decided immediately that I had to save my father no matter what. I had to help my father survive. By then, the 9 Supremes Lords who had obtained the 9-beam rainbow herb would have a great increase in their abilities and become a true legend of Yutong, forever dominating Yutong. Yun Yang was completely dumbfounded as he spoke. He really did not expect that there would be such a reversal from the beginning of the matter. Was this a reversal of fate? Was this the original intention of the person who schemed against the 9 brothers? I told my father about my decision and he said that before I could seek help from the 9 Supremes, I still needed to find a miraculous herb called the Heartbreak Herb. As long as the 9 Supremes' location was confirmed, my father would be able to suppress his injuries temporarily after consuming the Heartbreak Elixir and negotiate with the 9 Supremes. Once the deal is done, when the venom of the heartbroken sorrow acts up, cut open his dantian and take out the 9-beam rainbow herb for the 9 Supremes to consume. Then, we'll transfer the spiritual energy to reconstruct my father's flesh and blood and condense the 5 elements into his body. Only then can the curse of death be completely lifted. It will be a happy ending for all. I, Yang Buotao, have become the empire of Yutong's unforgivable sinner. Yang Buotao's eyes were filled with bewilderment as he repeated, "Sinner." He was a sinner for all eternity. Yun Yang sighed inwardly. He did not know what to say. Yang Buotao's breath gradually weakened as he spoke. His face grew paler and paler. He struggled with all his might and pleaded softly, "Lord Supreme Wind, give me a breath, let me finish." Yun Yang sighed and pressed his hand against the center of his back, sending a wisp of refined mystical chi over. I wanted to bring this matter to my grave. I didn't even tell my wife. This is the shame of my life. It's better to say that I'm a completely bad person. But when I saw Lord Supreme Wind that day, Lord Supreme Wind had clearly pointed his target at me. I had the urge to let it all out. It was only just now that I finally decided to tell everyone about this matter. I don't want my wife to still ignore me when she's in the underworld. I don't want my wife to still think that her husband is a hypocrite, a treacherous, unpardonable person even when she's in the underworld. She has entrusted her life to the wrong person. Yang Buotao's gaze was unfocused as he held his breath forcefully and mumbled to himself. She won't. Yun Yang sighed. Yun Yang really did not know what to say at this point. So many of his brothers had died because of his intelligence, yet he had to comfort him instead? But who could be blamed for this? More than 10 days later, my father came back. He said he wanted to bring me far away. He would even give me a brighter future. Yang Buotao said weakly. I asked him frantically, why? Why did he do this? Why? Extreme insanity flashed in Yang Buotao's eyes. Actually, I had already vaguely guessed then that my father was from the Four Seasons Tower, and he was one of the Four Seasons Tower's higher-ups. If it wasn't so, I would have been silenced. But I still wanted to ask to get to the bottom of this, to get to the bottom of it. I couldn't accept it. I had fought for Yutong my entire life, but in the end, I became a sinner. My father told me directly that the existence of the 9 Supremes was a huge threat and that they had to be eliminated. It would be the continent's fortune if all of them died. This wasn't a family matter, it was something that should be done, something that should be done. But I didn't understand. I really didn't. Then I asked him, was the 9-beam rainbow herb real? He said it was fake. Everything was a lie to ascertain the whereabouts of the 9 Supremes. Yang Buatao was the most important part of this lie. Heh 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 heh. And the one who triggered this most important part of me was my biological father. Heh heh heh. Yang Buatao's voice was bleak. Although he was laughing, his laughter was self-deprecating, his gaze empty and dead. If I were to die in the battlefield, die of illness, die of poison, I, Yang Buatao, could smile and be fearless. But to die like this, because of such a reason, to bear the eternal infamy, a humiliation that could never be washed away, I, Yang Buatao, would not die in peace. Chapter 258. No matter who it was, they would not feel good if they were deceived and used by their biological father like this. What was more, someone like Yang Buatao had everything destroyed. However, the one who had destroyed everything was his biological father. How could he explain it? He wanted me to bring him away, but I refused. He left a few days later. When he left, I didn't send him off. I don't know how to treat him anymore. Yang Buatao said, but I still want to live here. I want to atone for my sins, I want to continue contributing to Yutong, to make up for my mistakes, until the day I die in the battlefield. I was really naive then. Perhaps I could die in the battlefield during one of the great wars, ending all my troubles once and for all. I could be lucky enough to stay in this world. No matter what, I still have to keep this secret. Since no one knows about it, I can only carry it on myself because I have so many brothers of the northern troop behind me. I can't let them be shamed because of me, unable to lift their heads because of me. I can only hide it as much as I can and do things carefully, Yang Buatao said, but I didn't have to wait until the day I die on the battlefield. To me, innocence is a luxury that I can't afford. What man does is watched by the heavens. The cycle of reincarnation has never spared anyone. Yang Buatao looked at Yunyang and said softly, Lord Supreme Wind, to be able to die in your hands today, I, Yang Buatao, have no regrets. I'm even happy to die. I'm grateful. Even though I can't rest in peace. Yang Buatao said weakly, there's only one thing I have to remind Supreme Wind. After the incident, I've thought about it and connected the dots. I realized that a lot of people knew that I was inquiring about the 9 Supremes. Many of them even provided me with information about the 9 Supremes intentionally or unintentionally. However, none of them stood up to question me after the incident. Isn't this extremely strange? Yun Yang's gaze flickered as he asked, who else has provided you with information? Yang Buatao said, many people. Besides the Minister of Imperial Household Jiang Zhong and Fu Baogua, there's also the Minister of Imperial Household Mi Kongquan. Right, the 4th prince has also spoken to me about it. Yun Yang's gaze froze. The 4th prince? Are you sure? Yang Buatao's eyes were clear. Do you think I would lie to you at a time like this? Yun Yang sucked in a deep breath and said, one last question. Who exactly is your father to the 4 Seasons Tower? I'm sure you know the answer. You want me to avenge you, right? Yang Buatao smiled sadly. I do know the answer, but Lord Supreme Wind. I'm really sorry. I can't tell you the answer. Yun Yang was stunned. Over there, the other side, there were also many people like him who had foolishly set up traps and waited for a few days. The green wind became faster and faster, gradually turning into a hurricane, sweeping across the sky at high speed. They headed towards Tiantang City. High up in the sky, the saber light flashed again. As expected, the saber in the sky reappeared and chased after him. He didn't fall for it? It doesn't matter. Even if he racked his brains, he wouldn't have thought that I've been keeping a close eye on him. He'll have to go through me if he wants to escape unscathed. If the legend of the 9 Supremes ends in my hands, it'll be a story to be told. Adding another page to my legend. The saber light was secretly pleased, determined to write another page of his legend. Having made up his mind, he became even more careful. After catching up to the sound of the wind,
He followed it carefully and even purposely widened the distance between them. He was afraid of alerting the enemy, and Supreme Wind would be aware of it, which would ruin the story. This return journey was led by Yang Buotao, so the speed was much faster than when they came. When they came, even if the person carrying Yang Buotao had a 10th perfection cultivation base, he was still carrying a strong man.
His speed would inevitably be reduced. Now, the entire journey was at the speed of a hurricane. How could the speed be slow?
On the contrary, the saber in the sky was not at all anxious. He was very patient now, leaning more towards using this opportunity to locate Supreme Wind's lair and confirm if there were any other 9 Supremes in the world. After all, there had been an attack of the mystical flame on the night of the attack on Yang Buotao.
It was suspected that Supreme Flame was still alive.
Supreme Wind was already under his control. There was no need to rush to take him down. As the chase went on for 180 miles, the majestic city walls of Tiantang City could be seen from afar. Suddenly, the saber in the sky was stunned. He was shocked to realize that Supreme Wind's will that he was tracking was actually gradually dissipating. After a while, it had completely disappeared. He had been chasing after it. His deific consciousness locked onto it. How could he have lost it? The saber in the sky was obviously unable to accept this result. After a moment of stupor, he began to circle back and forth anxiously in the clouds, searching the surroundings in vain. Compared to being deceived right from the start, he was more inclined to believe that he had been accidentally discovered by Supreme Wind and had used some kind of skill to temporarily dissipate his will. This was why the signs of his will dissipating had appeared. However, if this was the case, he could not have gone far.
He must be nearby.
The saber in the sky had spread his deific consciousness to its maximum limit, searching with all his might without any concealment, but it was still futile. He could not help but admit that he had been tricked. However, he still could not understand. He had chased after the other party all the way out of the city and all the way back. His consciousness had long been locked onto the other party. It was not an ordinary lock, but a lock of the soul imprint.
How could it suddenly disappear? Could it be that a person's soul imprint could actually vanish abruptly due to some kind of trick?
Was it not a skill that was above the legendary Young God level?
How could Supreme Wind's insignificant cultivation base be able to do it? This saber light was hidden in a layer of clouds in a daze.
It was still puzzled no matter how hard it thought about it.
It was stunned for a long time.
There was only a feeling of being F***ed in his heart. The frustration and inexplicable sense of loss was enough to make one break down. Even though he was knowledgeable and experienced, he was still at a loss at the moment.
What was going on?
The truth was very simple. The hurricane that the saber in the sky had been tracking was only a manifestation of the wind attribute that Yun Yang had cast.
Although it had spirit, form, it was only sustained by a single breath. As the breath dissipated, the 3 forms, form, spirit, and form, would dissipate.
What was there to be surprised about?
As for Yun Yang himself, he had turned into a cloud and was still hovering in the sky above the mountain.
He had not gone far at all.
At this moment, the sky was covered in dark clouds, lightning flashed, and thunder rumbled. It looked like a heavy rain was coming.
However, the rain that was supposed to come did not come. The rocks on the mountain peak below gave Yun Yang an extremely oppressive feeling. The oppressive feeling reminded Yun Yang of Tianxian Cliff and the tragic battle that had taken place there. Actually, the oppressive feeling here was much lighter than when he was at Tianxian Cliff, but the feeling was still the same. There's indeed an ambush similar to the spiritual ceiling formation there. Yun Yang cursed in his heart. After confirming the other party's setup, he could not help but be more careful. Once he was discovered and the other party activated the formation, the mystical art of manifestation would no longer work. It was inevitable that he would be in a very difficult situation. He might even be on the brink of death. It was not only Yun Yang who was cursing, there were also curses coming from below.
That Supreme Wind is too slippery.
King Hell, we're all prepared but he's not coming. Your father has waited for so many people to take off their pants and he actually gave up?
Did he get cold feet?
That B**** ran so fast, he's gone in an instant.
What a bastard.
There was a huge disparity in their abilities. Once he was discovered, he would basically die. He could not take the risk. Since he had achieved his goal today, it was time to retreat. With a single thought,
the sound of the wind grew stronger. The dark clouds in the sky actually moved slowly, rising higher as if a storm was brewing. After a while, the gloomy sky seemed to brighten up.
The man in gold lifted his head and looked at the dark clouds that had been covering the sky, as well as the bolts of lightning that slithered around, but they seemed to have lessened.
Was the expected rain not coming, but the sky was going to clear up? How could there be no rain after being oppressed for so long? He had never seen such a phenomenon in all his years of life experience. Usually, there would be rain in such a depressing weather. What was going on today? He frowned. Suddenly, with a long howl, he sprung up.
The light in his hand shone brightly as an unusually sharp sword energy soared into the sky.
Chapter 261.
After a long time, the golden-robed man chuckled bitterly and said, "We found out too late when the 9 Supremes were set up by the Four Seasons Tower. By the time we rushed over, everything was already over. We thought that the 9 Supremes had been annihilated, and the Four Seasons Tower's ability was far above ours. No matter how unwilling we were, we could only pretend to be deaf and mute. I know that all of you are feeling heavy inside, like how ungrateful you are. It's hard to repay a debt of gratitude, let alone a debt of gratitude without a creditor. You know the way to repay the debt, but you're helpless. But now, the remaining person of the 9 Supremes obviously knows that it's the Four Seasons Tower's doing. What he's doing is revenge. Oh, 7th has coincidentally met him again. We really can't ignore this matter.
But we really have no chance of winning against the Four Seasons Tower. It was so back then and it's still the same now." The golden-robed man sighed. "We've only digested less than 1/10 of the Haunting Temple's power the last time we obtained it. If we were given another 20 years, what would we have to fear even if we were to face the Four Seasons Tower? But now, we're really no match for the Four Seasons Tower. Let's discuss what we should do about this matter," the golden-robed man said in a low voice. First Court King Qingguang lowered his head and did not speak. The other brothers also had solemn expressions on their faces. It was not a trivial matter to face the Four Seasons Tower. The concourse of the underworld could very possibly be annihilated in a clash with the other party, leaving nothing behind. There would definitely be sacrifices among the brothers present, perhaps even a complete annihilation. It was a difficult decision to make. Let's not talk about anything else first. Supreme Lord Springfrost must die. First Court King Qingguang mumbled in a low voice, "I've already accepted the commission. I must eliminate this target no matter what." Still, none of the brothers spoke. After a long time, a burly man said, "No matter what, we have to repay what we owe them." Another man said with his head hanging low, "We didn't do anything when the 9 Supremes were killed. Even when we knew that we had no choice but to do it due to the circumstances, your father still feels that something's not right. I can't lift my head. Yeah, I keep feeling guilty. I've let her down. I don't feel good either. 7th brother is right. If you owe someone a debt, you won't feel good until you pay it back. If you don't pay back the debt of gratitude, how can you talk about reaching the peak, and how can your state of mind be complete?" The brothers chimed in one after another, lowering their heads and muttering to themselves. The golden-robed man frowned and said, "What do you want to do? Can't you just say it?" The brothers said in unison, "Big brother, you make the decision."
The golden-robed man was exasperated.
"Then what's the use of your discussion?" The person who had not spoken was the 5th Yama King. He had a square face and pondered for a moment before saying, "Although the concourse of the underworld is only an assassin organization, after we have received the power of the Haunting Temple, we are also an existence equivalent to the reincarnation of the underworld. The cycle of karma, good and evil will be rewarded. Kindness must be repaid and enmity must be eliminated. Otherwise, there will always be a barrier in the heart that cannot be crossed. Indeed, there is no right to talk about perfection. Therefore, I feel that we can't shirk this matter. Last time, we were cowards and have already caused a knot in the hearts of the brothers. If we were to shrink back this time, I'm afraid that it will form an inner demon. That will only bring harm to our cultivation, and the path of cultivation will be precarious. Therefore, I feel that we have to do this. We must do it, we must do it." The 5th Yama King's words were almost the final word. All right,
the golden-robed man said. If so, we will do it.
our current target is only Supreme Lord Spring Frost. Let's get rid of Supreme Lord Spring Frost first and see the Four Seasons Tower's reaction. The 10th Chakravarti king rolled his eyes and said, We have accepted the commission and we have to kill. This is how we do things. So what if the Four Seasons Tower has an opinion? Even if they come knocking on our door, we have an excuse. Must we not kill the Four Seasons Tower's men?
The golden-robed man, Third Court Emperor Song chuckled bitterly and said, Luckily, this fellow has only entrusted Supreme Lord Spring Frost. If he had entrusted it to Mr. Nyen. The 10 brothers chuckled together.
If the target is Mr. Nyen, then we'll really have to. But we'll still have to do it. Third Court Emperor Song scolded, All of you, shut up. Let's discuss how we're going to complete this mission.
He snapped his fingers and said, It's only Supreme Lord Spring Frost.
We'll just kill him. Kill him. The other 9 brothers cheered loudly. Their spirits lifted in an instant. First Court King Qingguang blinked and said, This isn't an easy task.
That fellow is a tricky one as well. The other 9 brothers turned to look at him with unfriendly gazes.
So what if the target is tricky? Weren't you the one who lured the tricky target here? Before we do it, why don't we get rid of this bastard first? Let's all have a good time. Let's have a good time. Go!
The 9 of them swarmed forward.
They threw First Court King Qingguang to the ground in an instant and followed up with punches and kicks. First Court King Qingguang cried out, Have mercy! Bam 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 bam! Yun Yang returned to Tiantang City quietly and found a secluded corner to revert to his original appearance.
He then returned to the residence of Heavenly Clouds with great fanfare. However, when he stepped into the residence of Yun, he was surprised to see Feng Mafei and the others wearing an odd expression.
Just as he was feeling puzzled, he saw someone walking out slowly from the residence and looking at him with a smile. It was Qiu Jianhan. Old Marshal Qiu was here.
Yun Yang coughed and said with a face full of smiles, Old Marshal, how do you have the time to come here?
What a rare guest. Qiu Jianhan tilted his head and said, Why can't I come? Yun Yang chuckled humorlessly. Old sir, what are you talking about? Of course you can come. It's more than just being able to come.
Your presence brings light to the humble abode of the heavenly clouds and fills the hall with splendor.
Qiu Jianhan snorted and glared at him from the corner of his eyes, saying, Don't you play around with this old man. Where did you go to play again? Yun Yang replied, Didn't I go to watch the show? Sigh, as I watched, a fight broke out on the stage. Everything I saw was crimson, flesh and blood flying everywhere. It was terrifying. This nephew was so scared that I hid and shivered for a long time. Only then did I have the strength to walk home.
Sigh, it was really all blood, Qiu Jianhan snorted. So young Master Yun is actually so cowardly? Yun Yang felt that the old man's words were rather sarcastic, so he said bluntly, May I ask what old Marshal wants to do by coming here?
If there's nothing important, I'd like to go in and catch up on some sleep. The commotion today was too shocking. I'm still dizzy from the shock. Go in quickly and rest up. Qiu Jianhan snorted coldly and said, It looks like young Master Yun is only watching the show today and has actually forgotten that today is the day you're helping His Majesty to relieve his stress. I wonder what young Master Yun's serious business is? Yun Yang's heart skipped a beat. He seemed to have forgotten about this.
Helping the emperor take care of his body was a serious matter, and it was even more important. However, there were so many things that required him to personally handle them, so he really did not take the emperor's matter to heart. After all, the emperor's body was no longer that important. There were always priorities, and even serious matters had to be prioritized first and second. However, Yun Yang dared not say this out loud. If he did, old Marshal Qiu would definitely beat him up. Not to forget that other than being Yutong's old marshal, Qiu Jianhan was also the leader of Yutong's 3 rogues. Haha. His Majesty's matter is of course the most important matter. Of course, it has to be dealt with first. I'll go now. Yun Yang chuckled awkwardly. Along the way, old Marshal Qiu Jianhan's gaze was fixed on Yun Yang, full of suspicion and confusion. Yun Yang felt like there was a prick on his back, an indescribable discomfort, but he dared not ask aloud. He could only mutter inwardly, Could this old man have seen through my flaws? Otherwise, why would he stare at me like this? Yun Yang and Qiu Jianhan had only taken a few steps when they saw Qiu Yunsan and Xia Bingchuan of the four noble young masters walking towards them excitedly. Each of them was accompanied by about 20 guards, each of them in high spirits.
It was obvious that each of them was a top-notch expert.
Not to mention anything else. Just the rank of these guards was far above all the guards of the four young masters.
It was obvious that these guards were the pillars of the four noble families, top-notch experts.
Yun Yang made a rough comparison in his heart. Any one of these new guards by Qiu Yunsan and Xia Bingchuan's side was not weaker than the Four Seasons Towers guards who had been protecting Yang Buotao back then.
It looked like the four noble families had really sent out their pinnacle forces this time.
However, would it be a little too extravagant to place these combat forces by the four noble young masters' side?
With another glance, Yun Yang understood what was going on.
Each of the two young masters was carrying a chubby mystical beast cub in their arms.
Both of them were overjoyed when they saw Yun Yang.
Xia Bingchuan aside, even Qiu Yunsan had ignored old Marshal Qiu who was beside him and dashed over excitedly.
"Boss!
Ha 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 ha! Boss, what a coincidence, you're also walking today. Ha 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 ha!"
Qiu Yunsan said.
"Boss, boss, boss! Ha ha ha, what a coincidence! I can't believe I see you in Tiantang City again. Ha ha ha, we brothers are really fated."
Xia Bingchuan said.
"What do you call this?"
"This is called being fated to meet from thousands of miles away."
"Boss, look at this." Qiu Yunsan came over with a fawning expression.
"Look at this of mine.
Ha ha ha, this is my family's treasure." The tiny mystical beast in his arms that had yet to open its eyes was humming. "Boss, look at this."
Xia Bingchuan took a step forward and pushed Qiu Yunsan to the side. "You should look at this. This was just delivered. It's so cute."
Ha ha. I really want to swallow it. In Xia Bingchuan's arms was a tiny mystical beast as well. It had a chubby body, soft fur and a tiny wet nose. The corners of Yun Yang's lips twitched.
That was right.
These two were the cubs of 8th level advanced mystical beasts.
Chapter 262.
Yun Yang recognized the one in Qiu Yunsan's arms at first glance. This was indeed an 8th level Xian beast, without a doubt. However, this little mystical beast's nose seemed to be bigger than its face. This 8th level advanced mystical beast was called Three-Eye Boar. And, as the name suggested, this Xian beast cub's foundation was that of a wild boar, but a boar with 3 eyes. It was said that before the third eye of a 3-eye boar opened, its combat power was very weak. It was not much stronger than a wild boar of the same size, let alone a high-level mystical beast. At most, it would have a powerful impact. In spite of this, the ray emitted by its third eye could kill a 9th peak mystical cultivator within seconds. It was truly remarkable. However, the third eye would need to grow to adulthood before it would open. Therefore, this 3-eye boar was considered a useless 8th level mystical beast that could kill enemies of a higher level. Other than that, this 3-eye boar was no different from an ordinary domestic pig. It was gluttonous and lazy, snoring loudly every day. The corners of Yun Yang's lips twitched. It was obvious that he was not fond of such useless creatures. After all, a 3-eye boar needed a long time to grow to adulthood. Although it was not as long as the 1,000 illusion monkey's 70 to 80 years of growth, it still needed at least 30 years. Yun Yang, on the other hand, was extremely interested in the 3-eye boar's other characteristics.
3-eye boar's pork was a delicacy.
What surprised Yun Yang was how the Qiu family had managed to keep this 3-eye boar cub. It was already difficult enough to capture a mystical beast alive. It was even more difficult to capture a cub. Mystical cultivators could kill mystical beasts, but mystical beasts that were in the incubation period would usually kill their own children before they died. They would rather kill their own children with their own hands than allow their children to be enslaved by humans. The higher the level of the mystical beast, the more it was so. The reason why Yun Yang found it odd was because of the 3-eye boar's habits. An adult 3-eye boar possessed the ray of death that could kill mystical cultivators beyond its level. If one wanted to capture a 3-eye boar's offspring, it would be difficult to do so without paying a considerable price. A few 9th peak cultivators would be killed or injured at every turn. Even if one managed to capture it, it would require a long period of nurturing. Only when the 3-eye boar reached adulthood would it be able to unleash its unique combat power. It would be difficult to balance the reward with the effort. Yun Yang was puzzled, but he did not show it on his face. He scanned the three-eyed pig and thought to himself, "Sigh, it's too small. There's less than 2 caddies of meat. Let's talk about it when we're older." What would the Cho family think if they knew that the mystical beast babies they had painstakingly obtained were actually high-grade ingredients in Yun Yang's eyes? Yun Yang then looked at the 8th-level pinnacle mystical beast in Xia Bingchuan's arms. Yes, this cub's level was half a level higher than Cho Yun-san's rank 8 advanced three-eye boar, but it was more delicious than the three-eye boar. Because this cub was a gluttonous bear. It was also known as the 10,000 catty bear. As the name suggested, this kind of bear-type mystical beast was famous for its ability to eat. It was normal for it to grow to 7 or 8,000 catties when it was fully grown. It could easily reach the level of 10,000 catties. As for this bear's talent, there was nothing else but its immense strength. There seemed to be no conclusion as to how strong this gluttonous bear was. Most probably, the more it ate, the greater its strength. Due to its massive size, the way it fought its enemies was a slap. No matter who the enemy was, a slap would be delivered without a care in the world. It would be a piece of cake for it to destroy mountains, crack the earth, and shatter the clouds. Therefore, this bear's paw had a resounding nickname: the sky-shattering slap. Oh, there was another characteristic of this 10,000 catty bear. If it could not defeat its opponent with 3 consecutive slaps, it would immediately turn and run. There was no exception. This run was not because it was afraid of the enemy, but it was a strategic shift. Because all of its strength could only support those 3 slaps. After the 3 slaps, it could only recover after eating a large amount of food. Therefore, this gluttonous bear had another nickname: the 3-slap bear. The power of the 3 slaps was indeed formidable. A slap from a gluttonous bear that weighed 10,000 catties could even send a small hill flying. However, the problem was, what kind of enemy would stand there and let you slap it? This 3-slap bear, on the other hand, would spin its body 7 to 8 times if it could not even hit its opponent with 1 slap. Based on this alone, it was indeed stupider than an ordinary stupid bear without a level. If it were not for the bear's thick skin and flesh that ordinary 9th-level mystical beasts could not break through its defense, this bear species would have long gone extinct in this world. This gluttonous bear might be the easiest high-level mystical beast to obtain in this world, but it was also the most useless high-level mystical beast. If the 3-eye boar was of little value, then the gluttonous bear was even worse. In Yun Yang's eyes, the benefits of this 10,000 catty bear were more than that of the 3-eye boar. Bear's paw, delicious. Bear's gallbladder, an expensive medicinal herb. Bear's meat, delicious. Bear's penis. Cho Yun-san could use it. It would be useful if he ate it. Yun Yang looked at Cho Yun-san and Xia Bingchuan speechlessly. You 2 noble families have been busy for half a year. And you've only caught 2 of these things? Each of you is weirder than the other. What are you thinking? Is your family planning to toy with the 2 of you or me? Cho Yun-san and Xia Bingchuan blushed as they coughed. They could not do anything about it. If it were not for the fact that they had no other choice, why would they ask for trouble and embarrass themselves? Those mystical beasts that could fly and had innate skills were great, of course, but they could not be caught. Was it not because they were relatively easy to obtain that they had caught these 2? After all, they're solid 8th-level pinnacle mystical beasts. There's definitely value in nurturing them. Cho Yun-san chuckled awkwardly. Yun Yang heaved a sigh of relief, speechless. Boss, look at us. Cho Yun-san hugged the 3-eye boar excitedly while the piglet hummed in his embrace. Shall we begin? Scram. Cho Zhenhan stood aside, exasperated. All of you scram to your father's side. The old man had finally unleashed his power. King Hell. Your father has been standing here for a long time. Have I become invisible? Why can't I see any of you? Why are you all so agitated? Cho Yun-san paled as he turned his head slowly. Third uncle, what a coincidence. If you don't scram, I'll make both your cheeks and your buttocks say what a coincidence. You all look King the same. Cho Zhenhan cursed loudly. You good-for-nothing scram. And you. The old marshal turned to look at Xia Bingchuan. Can't your family send a good person out? My Yun-san has become a popinjay after following you bunch of useless things. You better stay away from my Yun-san in the future. Xia Bingchuan and Cho Yun-san had no chance of defending themselves against Yutong's #1 old gangster. They fled in panic,
like fish that had slipped through the net. The guards of both families bowed at Qiu Jianhan awkwardly and left, exasperated. It was too embarrassing. We could recognize this third young master of the Qiu family from hundreds of feet away, but these two fellows actually did not realize it even when they were so close to each other and spoke to Yun Yang for such a long time. There was no one else like this. It was appropriate to call them popinjays. They were a perfect pair, seamless and flawless. This Xia family's child is a disappointment. Old Marshal Qiu walked with Yun Yang, committing all sorts of crimes, indulging in debauchery, fighting, and flirting with women. Dong Tianling from the Dong family and Chun Qingfeng from the Chun family aren't any good either. Yet this one of mine likes to play with the three of them, learning nothing from them. What a sin! Yun Yang rolled his eyes. It was hard to say who would learn from whom when these four people were together. However, your nephew, Qiu Yun-san, is definitely a teacher.
How dare you say that, old man? Yun Yang's way of handling matters was meticulous and meticulous. His words were always simple and profound, his wisdom as vast as the sea.
He was never greedy for achievements, nor did he lust for power or position.
He was rather well versed in the ways of the world, able to advance and retreat with ease.
It was truly remarkable that such a character did not wish to become an official in the imperial court. It was a pity for Yu Tong. It doesn't matter if there's nothing else. The follow-up to this matter is vague anyway. With your popinjay nature, you won't be able to do it. However, Yun Yang, this old man has a serious question. Marshal Qiu Jianhan's expression turned serious. Where did the mystical cultivation method that you cultivate come from? It seems like Marquis Yun doesn't have such an extraordinary cultivation method? Yun Yang was stunned. Huh? What huh? Do you really think this old man doesn't know what's good for him? Old Marshal Qiu glared. This old man comes from the Qiu family. Although I've spent most of my life on the battlefield, I can be said to be knowledgeable. However, I've never seen such a mystical cultivation method. My old friend, Yu Tixin, had once said that this cultivation method is absolutely unique in the world in terms of healing injuries, reviving the soul and prolonging life, expelling poisons and illnesses. Moreover, it has never appeared in the Tianxian continent for so many years. The appearance of such a cultivation method will easily cause a great disturbance. I'm asking this question today not because I want to find out your background, but because I'm worried about your safety. Since the other party dared to poison His Majesty, they will keep a close watch on His Majesty's physical condition at all times. Once they find that His Majesty has recovered, they will definitely find someone who can help His Majesty get rid of the poison.
Answer me quickly so that this old man and His Majesty can plan for you.
You, how could you? Yun Yang's eyes darted around as his thoughts raced. It was true that the older one was the wiser.
Yun Yang truly did not expect this old man to realize something was amiss right from the start, but he had waited until His Majesty had fully recovered before he actually made things difficult for him.
This old man's ability to burn bridges after crossing the river was not lacking at all.
Yet, he was able to say it in such a dignified, open and above-board manner.
He was filled with the words "I'm thinking for you. That's why I'm asking this question. If you don't tell the truth, then you're in the wrong. If you don't know how to be deeply grateful, then quickly tell the truth." My cultivation method is a coincidence. Yun Yang's mind raced. I learned it from my master. May I ask who your master is? Old Marshal Qiu snorted. Ling Xiaozue. Don't you all know? Didn't he come some time ago? Yun Yang pulled out an existence that he could not afford to offend and said, I thought you already knew about my relationship with him. If it wasn't for this relationship, how would I have dared to take the medicine that day? It was because I believed that my master wouldn't harm me that I revealed His Majesty's physical condition and offered the 3 spiritual medicines. If you still don't believe me, you can ask him. Old Marshal Qiu almost choked on the breath that was stuck in his throat. Yun Yang's answer was reasonable and logical. Most importantly, it was asking me to ask Ling Xiaozue? Where the F*ck would I go to ask him? Was he someone who could be casually asked? Your words are still not entirely true. If Ling Xiaozue had cultivated this cultivation method, his achievements would have long surpassed this. Qiu Jianhan glared at Yun Yang. Besides, since when did Ling Xiaozue become your master?
Yun Yang said seriously, Old Marshal, the cultivation method that Yun Yang cultivated was marvelous. You were the one who said it.
My master's cultivation base level was also determined by you. This junior is not qualified enough to comment.
I can only say that I have not spoken a single word of falsehood.
Qiu Jianhan retorted angrily. Don't try to use words with this old man.
That's what this old man has done.
Do you think that this old man doesn't know that everything you've said is a lie? Yun Yang rolled his eyes. The title of the leader of Yutong's 3 top rogues was indeed well-deserved.
Even his covert words had been heard. But so what if this old man had heard them?
Would he dare to bite him in his face?
His Majesty could not help chuckling and said, Forget it.
It's always a good thing for a junior to have such an opportunity. Old Marshal, you really don't have to take it to heart. Not a single word of truth comes out of this child's mouth.
Qiu Jianhan sighed and did not speak further. He thought, Your Majesty, there are many things you don't know. My suspicions aren't limited to the cultivation method he cultivates. What he did not know was that His Majesty had a vague thought in his mind.
Yun Yang was magnanimous and had no intention of becoming an official despite his extraordinary intelligence. However, everything he had done previously had been on Yutong's side. Even if he could not recruit such a person, he could not be pushed too far. It was obvious that His Majesty's evaluation of Yun Yang was extremely high. He was already treating him like an otherworldly expert. When Yun Yang finally excused himself, he realized that he was drenched in cold sweat. Is Old Marshal suspecting me? Yun Yang thought to himself, his actions today aren't because he suspects that I have ill intentions.
He's directly suspecting if I'm one of the 9 Supremes or if I belong to the 9 Heavens dictum. He left the residence of Qiu Jianhan with a heavy heart and did not return to the residence of Yun.
Instead, he went to find out where Yang Buotao's wife was buried. Silently, he buried Yang Buotao's ashes on his wife's grave. Your family is reunited from now on. Meet again in the netherworld. Yun Yang stood quietly for a moment and murmured, There are no more schemes in the netherworld, no father who would harm his own son. Yang Buotao, if there's a next life, I believe you'll still be a good man. Mistress Yang, your husband has always been a good man, a good son. There's no need for you to be ashamed of marrying him. I am Supreme Cloud. I wish you both well and solemnly inform you that the 9 Supremes have no ill feelings towards you and your wife anymore. The grudges are settled, the past grudges are forgotten, everything written off. May the heavens bless us and we shall be good friends in our next lives. The wind was soft, the wild grass beside the grave swayed softly. It was as if Yang Buotao and his wife were waving goodbye to Yun Yang. There's no need to linger in the secular world. Reincarnate as soon as possible. Forget the regrets of this life and start the legend of a hero again. Yun Yang bowed slightly, straightened himself and turned to walk away. He had only taken a few steps when he noticed a few people walking towards him with quick steps. Yun Yang's heart skipped a beat. A gust of wind blew, stirring up a cloud of dust to cover the new soil he had just stirred up. He then hid in a dark corner. It was Shangguan Lingxiu, accompanied by 2 guards. Yun Yang was surprised. Why was Shangguan Lingxiu here at this time? You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.